Welcome back to History Teller YT, the place where we dive deep into the stories that shaped our world, our technology, and our imagination. Today, we're going on a journey that spans the vastness of space, the heights of human ambition, and the intense rivalry of nations. This is a story of ingenuity, courage, and determination. A story that changed the way humanity sees itself and its place in the cosmos. We're talking about the space race, a period between 1957 and 1969 that began with the launch of Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth, and culminated with the awe-inspiring moment when humans first walked on the moon with Apollo 11. But this story is much more than just milestones. It's about the tireless scientists, fearless astronauts, and visionary leaders who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, all under the shadow of global tension during the Cold War. From the Soviet Union's triumph of launching Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, to the United States' determination to land men on the moon, every launch, every mission, and every problem solved carried immense stakes. Lives, national pride, and technological supremacy were all on the line. In this series, we'll explore not only the triumphs, but also the near disasters, like Apollo 13's life-threatening in-flight accident, which tested human ingenuity to its absolute limit. We'll trace how each Apollo mission, from Apollo 12's precision landing to Apollo 15, 16, and 17's extended scientific explorations, transformed the moon from a distant, mysterious rock into a laboratory of geological discovery. You'll hear about the Lunar Rover, the intricate experiments of ALSEP, and the groundbreaking discoveries of lunar rocks and soils that continue to shape planetary science today. But the story doesn't end on the moon. The space race sparked innovations that reshaped Earth itself. Satellite communications, weather monitoring, advances in computer technology, and even medical research were all accelerated by the challenges of space exploration. The era laid the foundation for future missions, orbital stations like Skylab, and eventually international collaborations in space that continue today with the ISS. So, buckle up and prepare for an incredible journey across decades of human history, where courage meets science, rivalry fuels innovation, and every mission teaches us something profound about our ability to explore the unknown. This is more than history. It's a testament to what humans can achieve when we dare to reach for the stars. In the early 1950s, the world stood at the edge of a transformation no one fully understood yet. Nations were rebuilding after World War II. Technology was rising at a speed never seen before, and the United States and the Soviet Union were slowly shifting from uneasy allies to dead serious rivals. Both countries were armed with nuclear weapons. Both were building larger and more advanced militaries, and both wanted to prove that their political and scientific systems were superior. But before rockets touched the darkness beyond Earth, people still thought of space mostly as a dream, something for science fiction books, comic strips, or Hollywood movies. Scientists in both nations had ideas about satellites, orbital physics, and long-distance rockets. Yet governments did not treat these ideas as urgent national projects until the Cold War pressure increased. During this period, military engineering was changing rapidly. The same scientists who had designed missiles during World War II were now working on powerful rockets capable of carrying warheads across continents. These rockets were dangerous, but they also opened a new doorway. If they could carry bombs, they could also carry scientific instruments or even future explorers. This dual purpose turned rockets into symbols of power. The Soviet Union and the United States knew that whichever nation mastered rocket technology first would dominate not just the battlefield, but also the skies above the entire planet. Space became the next frontier, not because people were dreaming about stars, but because nations feared falling behind in military and scientific power. By the mid-1950s, both sides were preparing to launch the first artificial satellite. The United States expected to lead because it had wealth, universities, and a strong scientific reputation. Soviet ambitions, however, were underestimated by most of the Western world. Scientists like Sergei Korolev in the USSR worked under extreme secrecy, hidden behind layers of government control. Meanwhile, American scientists openly discussed their plans for a peaceful scientific satellite during the upcoming International Geophysical Year. The stage was set, the pressure was rising, and the world was about to witness a moment that would change history forever. No one knew it yet, but the countdown to the space age had already begun. On October 4th, 1957, at a quiet Soviet launch site deep within Kazakhstan, a metal sphere the size of a beach ball rose into the sky on top of a powerful R-7 rocket. Minutes later, entered Earth's orbit. This object, simple, spherical, shiny, was named Sputnik 1, meaning traveler or fellow companion in Russian. It carried no camera, no weapon, no scientific laboratory. It had only one thing: it beeped. Those radio beeps, however, echoed across every continent and shattered the global balance of confidence and fear. For the Soviet Union, Sputnik was more than a scientific achievement. It was a demonstration of technological strength. The message was clear. If the USSR could launch a satellite into space, it also had the capability to deliver nuclear missiles across the world. Suddenly, the United States felt vulnerable in a way it had never experienced before. American newspapers ran headlines warning of a missile gap. Politicians demanded immediate action, and citizens stared at the night sky, imagining a small metal sphere passing overhead, sending its calm but chilling beeps down to Earth. Radios across the world picked up Sputnik's signal, and millions listened with amazement, excitement, and fear mixed together. The emotional impact was huge. The United States, which had believed it was the world leader in science and technology, suddenly appeared behind in the race for space and security. Schools began emphasizing science and math. New research programs were launched, and funding for technology skyrocketed. In homes, children became fascinated with rockets, and parents worried about the political implications of Soviet success. Meanwhile, the Soviets celebrated widely. The achievement allowed them to project global confidence and pride, proving they could compete with the most powerful nation on Earth. Sputnik also changed how humanity viewed space. It transformed the night sky from a peaceful, distant mystery into an arena of global competition. The space age had begun not with a peaceful scientific mission, but with a geopolitical shockwave. While both nations had planned satellites for years, only one actually made it first, and that victory created a race that would define the next decade. From that moment forward, space was no longer optional. Both nations felt compelled to push farther, faster, and bolder than ever before. The United States reacted to Sputnik with a mix of disbelief, frustration, and urgency. Government leaders immediately recognized that the Soviet achievement threatened not only national pride, but also military balance. If the USSR could place a satellite in orbit, then it could also develop intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of striking American cities. The fear of falling behind, known at the time as Sputnik panic, spread quickly. Newspapers published alarming editorials. Television shows discussed scientific shortcomings, and ordinary Americans began demanding that their government catch up at any cost. Inside the White House, President Dwight D. Eisenhower faced pressure from every direction. Military leaders demanded more investment in rocketry, scientists insisted on stronger research funding, and politicians warned that the nation's global leadership was at risk. Though Eisenhower personally remained calm, he understood that public confidence had been shaken. To restore trust and accelerate scientific progress, the government created new institutions that would shape the next decades of innovation. The most important of these was NASA, founded in 1958, which unified all civilian space efforts under one organization. NASA's formation marked a turning point. Space was no longer just a military interest, but a national mission embraced by science, industry, and education. American failures during this period fueled determination. Early attempts to launch satellites, such as the Vanguard project, resulted in embarrassing explosions broadcast on television. But these failures also reminded Americans that progress in space required patience, engineering discipline, and bold thinking. Soon, new programs like Explorer, Mercury, and later Apollo would rise from this period of anxiety. The pressure generated by Sputnik transformed U.S. science and education. Schools introduced advanced math and physics, scholarships expanded, and universities received funding to research everything from rocketry to material science. The nation realized that space success required not only rockets, but also a more scientifically prepared generation. Overall, the shock of 1957 gave the United States a new sense of purpose. What began as fear turned into determination. The space race was now fully alive, and America was preparing to fight back, scientifically, politically, and technologically. This fierce competition would push both nations toward accomplishments unimaginable only a few years earlier, setting the stage for human spaceflight, moon landings, and one of the most dramatic scientific rivalries in modern history. In the months following the shock of Sputnik, the United States entered a period of deep reflection and strategic urgency. Leaders across government, military, and scientific communities understood that simply reacting emotionally would not close the growing technological gap. A clear, coordinated plan was needed, and it had to begin with America placing its own satellite in orbit. The first attempt under the Vanguard program was a painful embarrassment. On live television, the rocket rose for a moment, lost power, collapsed back onto the launch pad, and exploded into a fireball. The world laughed, newspapers printed humiliating cartoons, and critics questioned whether America was truly capable of competing with the Soviet Union scientific power. Yet beneath the surface of public doubt, skilled American engineers were still working, and they were determined to prove themselves. That opportunity came through the Army Ballistic Missile Agency, where engineer Wernher von Braun and his team had been developing more reliable rockets. Their project, which had originally been restricted for political reasons, was suddenly authorized after the Vanguard failure. With intense pressure and limited time, the team adapted their Jupiter-C rocket to carry a small scientific satellite called Explorer 1. Finally, on January 31st, 1958, America achieved its long-awaited breakthrough. Explorer 1 successfully entered orbit and began transmitting data back to Earth. More importantly, it carried instruments designed by physicist James Van Allen, which soon revealed the existence of radiation belts surrounding Earth. This discovery, now known as the Van Allen radiation belts, became one of the first major scientific achievements of the space age. Explorer 1 helped restore American confidence. It showed that failure could be transformed into progress, and that the United States still possessed world-class scientific talent. Although the Soviets had made the first move, the Americans were quickly learning to respond with determination, innovation, and stronger organization. The successful launch also reshaped global perception. Other nations saw that the space race would not be one-sided. Both superpowers were capable of pushing boundaries and achieving technological wonders. Even more importantly, Explorer 1 served as a reminder that the pursuit of space exploration carried scientific value far beyond political rivalry. While governments competed for prestige, satellites were opening a new era of understanding about Earth's environment and the physics of outer space. At home, the American public embraced the triumph. Newspapers celebrated the launch, students felt energized to study science, and politicians used the success to argue for increased funding for advanced education. Across the nation, families gathered around black and white televisions to see animations and explanations of satellite orbits, while children dreamed about rockets and space travel. Even though the Soviets were still ahead in some areas, the Explorer 1's success signaled that the United States was now truly in the race, not as a panic follower, but as a determined competitor ready to challenge the USSR at every step. This shift in mindset would lay the foundation for future achievements that would push human exploration toward goals once considered unimaginable. The shock of Sputnik did more than provoke competition. It reshaped the entire structure of American science and technology. Before 1958, the United States space efforts were scattered across different military branches and research groups. Coordination was limited, goals sometimes conflicted, and civilian scientists often struggled to access the resources controlled by military agencies. After the Soviet success, it became clear that a single, unified organization was necessary to guide the nation's long-term space ambitions. As public pressure intensified and strategic concerns grew sharper, political leaders moved quickly. In July 1958, President Eisenhower signed legislation creating the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, known worldwide as NASA. NASA represented a bold new direction. It was a civilian agency designed to ensure that space exploration would not be driven solely by military interests. This distinction was important not just for international diplomacy, but also for scientific credibility. By placing science at the center of its mission, NASA became a symbol of peaceful progress, even while the broader space race remained deeply tied to Cold War rivalry. Many talented engineers and researchers from earlier organizations, such as the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, were absorbed into NASA. Their experience in aviation research provided a strong technical foundation for building spacecraft, tracking systems, launch vehicles, and the supporting infrastructure needed for ambitious missions. NASA's early years were filled with intense planning. Engineers worked on designing small capsules capable of carrying human beings safely into space, a challenge far more complex than launching satellites. Scientists pushed for missions that could study radiation, cosmic rays, and atmospheric behavior. Administrators argued for higher budgets and stronger collaboration among universities, laboratories, and private industries. Meanwhile, the American public viewed NASA with a mixture of hope and excitement. Posters, magazines, and newsreels highlighted the agency's futuristic vision. Children saw astronauts as heroic explorers, and educators used NASA materials to inspire a new generation of scientists. Space exploration became a cultural force, shaping dreams, entertainment, and academic goals across the nation. At the same time, NASA faced enormous pressure. The Soviets were not slowing down. They continued launching larger satellites, including Sputnik 2, which carried the first living creature, Laika the dog, into orbit. These achievements kept the USSR ahead in global prestige and reminded American leaders that scientific progress alone was not enough. Speed mattered too. Thus, NASA's leadership understood that they had to build not only reliable spacecraft, but also faster decision-making structures and stronger partnerships with industry. Every failure risked embarrassment, while every success carried symbolic weight. The agency was being watched by millions worldwide, and its early performance would determine whether the United States could truly challenge the Soviet lead. Despite the pressure, NASA brought order to chaos. It organized long-term planning, established mission schedules, and built major facilities such as the Johnson Space Center and the Kennedy Space Center. These sites became the launch pads, literally and figuratively, for America's future triumphs in human spaceflight. In just a few short years, NASA transformed from an idea on paper into one of the most powerful scientific institutions in the world. Its creation marked a turning point in the space race, proving that the United States was committed not just to competing with the Soviet Union, but to becoming a global leader in space exploration for generations to come. While the United States celebrated the success of Explorer 1 and the formation of NASA, the Soviet Union pressed forward with remarkable speed. Their leadership understood that every new achievement delivered enormous political value, strengthening their image as a technologically advanced superpower. With chief designer Sergei Korolev leading the program, the USSR focused on expanding their accomplishments beyond simple satellite launches. They aimed for deeper space exploration, biological experiments, and new demonstrations of rocket power, each designed to push boundaries and maintain their commanding lead in the space race. One of the most significant steps came through the Luna program, a series of missions aimed at exploring Earth's nearest neighbor, the Moon. In 1959, the Soviets achieved another historic milestone with Luna 1, the first spacecraft to escape Earth's gravitational pull. Though it missed the Moon, it became the first human-made object to reach a solar orbit, proving the USSR's increasing mastery of deep space trajectories. Later that year, Luna 2 successfully impacted the lunar surface, becoming the first object in history to reach the Moon. Shortly afterward, Luna 3 captured the first photographs of the Moon's far side, images no human had ever seen before. These successes stunned the world and reminded the United States that the Soviet lead was not shrinking, it was growing. The Soviets also continued biological experiments in space, which were essential for understanding whether humans could survive orbital conditions. Laika's tragic flight aboard Sputnik 2 sparked global debate, but it demonstrated that living organisms could endure the initial forces of launch. Subsequent missions carried dogs, such as Belka and Strelka, who became the first animals to survive a full orbital mission and return safely to Earth. Their successful flights encouraged Soviet scientists and offered reassurance that human space travel was becoming a real possibility. Each mission produced valuable data about weightlessness, radiation exposure, and stress on living organisms, knowledge that would later pave the way for Yuri Gagarin's historic journey. The Soviet achievements were more than technical victories. They were strategic moves in global diplomacy. Newspapers across Asia, Africa, and Latin America praised Soviet progress, often interpreting it as proof that socialist systems could compete with or even surpass Western models. The United States found itself not only racing technologically, but also competing for global influence. American leaders recognized that if they failed to match or surpass Soviet achievements, they risked losing political and ideological ground in the developing world. As a result, pressure on NASA continued to rise. Researchers pushed themselves harder, engineers worked longer hours, and leaders debated how far the nation should go in this rapidly intensifying contest. By the end of the 1950s, the space race had transformed from symbolic rivalry into a full-scale technological war of prestige and power. Both nations were investing enormous resources, pushing the boundaries of physics and engineering, and dreaming of goals once considered impossible. The decade closed with the Soviets confidently ahead, but with the Americans rapidly gaining momentum. The stage was set for an era of daring experiments, bold missions, and the ultimate question: who would send the first human into the unknown realm of space? As the new decade began, the world's two superpowers turned their attention toward a milestone that felt both thrilling and terrifying: sending a human being into space. Satellites were impressive technological achievements, but human spaceflight carried emotional, symbolic, and scientific weight far beyond anything launched before. To place a human into orbit required mastery over engineering, biology, medicine, psychology, and the limits of human endurance. Every failure could mean death, and every success would reshape world history. Both the United States and the Soviet Union understood that whichever nation accomplished this goal first would secure global prestige and prove the superiority of its scientific system. Before any astronaut or cosmonaut could be launched, scientists had to answer fundamental questions. Could a human survive the crushing force of launch? Would the brain function normally in weightlessness? Could the cardiovascular system adapt to orbit without fainting or shutting down? Would panic set in during isolation or sensory overload? These questions were not theoretical. They were urgent and potentially life-threatening. As a result, early tests focused heavily on animals, pressure chambers, spinning centrifuges, and simulated capsule environments. Volunteers and test subjects endured extreme conditions to mimic the physical stresses of spaceflight. Engineers and doctors examined heart rates, respiration, neurological responses, and muscle strength to predict what might happen in orbit. For the spacecraft itself, designers faced even greater challenges. A human crew capsule had to be compact, yet safe, light yet incredibly strong. It needed pressure control, communications, life support, re-entry heat shielding, and a parachute system for landing. Unlike satellites, human spacecraft had to protect a fragile biological passenger from vacuum, temperature swings, radiation, and vibration. The Soviets developed the Vostok capsule, simple, spherical, and robust. Its design focused on automation because Soviet planners preferred the spacecraft to control itself rather than give too much responsibility to the pilot. This approach fit the USSR's engineering philosophy. Machines should be reliable enough to operate without human input, reducing risk and removing uncertainty. Meanwhile, the United States was developing its Mercury spacecraft. It was smaller and tighter than Vostok, shaped like a bell, with a heat shield and a recovery system carried out by the Navy. American engineers prioritized human control, reflecting the national belief in test pilots as heroes and decision makers. The Mercury capsule included hand controls, manual attitude thrusters, and an escape tower for emergencies on the launch pad. This difference in philosophy, automatic Soviet spacecraft versus pilot-driven American spacecraft, would become a major theme throughout the early space race. Both nations also began selecting their first generation of space travelers. These individuals needed to be physically fit, psychologically stable, and mentally sharp. They had to handle extreme stress, follow instructions precisely, and remain calm even under life-threatening conditions. In the Soviet Union, candidates were chosen from elite Air Force pilots known for discipline and endurance. In the United States, NASA selected its famous Mercury 7 astronauts, legendary pilots with military backgrounds, strong personalities, and fierce determination to represent their country in the most dangerous mission ever attempted. The world watched closely as both superpowers prepared for the moment when a human being would break free from Earth's atmosphere for the first time in history. On the morning of April 12, 1961, at the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, a young Soviet pilot named Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin strapped himself into the Vostok 1 capsule. He was only 27 years old, cheerful, modest, and beloved by everyone who knew him. Yet behind his friendly smile was enormous courage. He understood that he was about to attempt something no human had ever done. The risks were immense. Rockets had exploded, test animals had died, and doctors still debated whether the human mind would remain stable in orbit. But Gagarin was determined, and so was the Soviet Union. The success of his mission was expected to show the world that the USSR remained ahead in the space race. At 9:07 a.m., the powerful R-7 rocket ignited and carried Vostok 1 into the sky. As the rocket roared upward, Gagarin uttered the now legendary phrase, "Poyekali," meaning "let's go." His voice captured the spirit of adventure and reflected the excitement of a new frontier. Moments later, he entered orbit and became the first human in history to travel into outer space. He circled Earth once in a 108-minute flight that changed humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. From orbit, Gagarin reported seeing the world with breathtaking clarity. Its curvature, its thin atmosphere, its clouds and oceans blending into one beautiful sphere. His words were filled with wonder, proving that humans could remain calm and functional even in the weightless environment of space. The success of Vostok 1 was an extraordinary moment for the Soviet Union. The world reacted with shock and admiration. Newspapers published giant headlines. Radios repeated Gagarin's voice, and political leaders offered congratulations, sometimes reluctantly, as the United States realized it had fallen behind once again. For the Soviets, Gagarin immediately became a national hero. His smiling face appeared on posters, medals, and stamps. Crowds filled the streets to celebrate, cheering for the man who had challenged the unknown. Gagarin embarked on a world tour, visiting dozens of countries as a symbol of Soviet achievement. His charm, kindness, and humility made him a global icon, transcending Cold War tensions. But the mission was not without danger. The Vostok capsule lacked a soft landing mechanism, meaning Gagarin had to eject at high altitude and parachute separately, a risky maneuver. Even after landing safely in a field near the Volga River, the exact details of the mission remained secret for years due to Soviet military culture. Nevertheless, nothing could diminish the historic importance of April 12th. Human beings had officially become a spacefaring species, and Yuri Gagarin had taken the first step. His flight forced the United States to accelerate its own program, igniting a new phase of competition that would eventually lead to the race to the moon. The news of Yuri Gagarin's successful flight hit the United States with the force of an earthquake. Americans had hoped to send one of the Mercury astronauts into orbit before the Soviets. But now the USSR had not only beaten them, it had achieved a milestone of unmatched global significance. The embarrassment was deep, and the pressure on NASA increased dramatically. Political leaders demanded immediate action. Engineers worked day and night to prepare the first American human spaceflight. The question was no longer whether the United States would enter human spaceflight, but how fast it could do so without compromising safety or credibility. NASA's first step was to complete a suborbital mission using the Mercury capsule. Unlike the Soviet approach, which placed Gagarin directly into orbit on its first attempt, the Americans decided to take a more cautious path. Their plan called for a shorter flight that would launch into space, follow a high arc, and land in the ocean. This would allow NASA to gather vital data while minimizing risk. On May 5th, 1961, less than a month after Gagarin's flight, astronaut Alan Shepard became the first American in space aboard Mercury Redstone 3, a mission known as Freedom 7. His flight lasted only 15 minutes, but it demonstrated that Americans were ready to join the human spaceflight arena. Shepard controlled the capsule manually, proving that astronauts could serve as active pilots rather than mere passengers. Shepard's success sparked national pride, yet the United States still had not matched the orbital achievement of Gagarin. This fueled determination within NASA and contributed to a major political decision. Just 20 days after Shepard's flight, President John F. Kennedy gave his famous speech to Congress, declaring that the United States would commit itself to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before the decade was out. This bold vision stunned the world. Kennedy admitted that America was not leading in space, but he insisted that the nation would not remain behind. The moon goal represented the ultimate challenge, one so difficult that achieving it would prove American scientific and industrial strength beyond dispute. Behind the scenes, the Mercury program continued preparing for orbital missions. Engineers upgraded rockets, strengthened heat shields, improved tracking systems, and conducted dozens of tests. The next major milestone came in February 1962, when astronaut John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth, completing 3 full revolutions aboard Friendship 7. The mission restored American confidence and showed that the United States was now capable of competing directly with the Soviet Union in human spaceflight. Glenn returned to Earth as a national hero, greeted by cheering crowds much like Gagarin had experienced. By the end of 1961, the rivalry between the superpowers was no longer just about satellites or political prestige. It was a direct competition between human explorers. Each nation sought to push farther, climb higher, and dream bigger. The stage was now set for the next chapter. The struggle to master long-duration missions, complex maneuvers, and ultimately, the challenge of reaching the moon. After the excitement of Alan Shepard's suborbital flight, NASA immediately shifted into a higher gear. The next phase of Project Mercury was clear. The United States needed to send an astronaut into full orbit around Earth, proving that it could match the Soviet achievement and show the world that American engineering was rapidly catching up. But achieving orbit required much more power than a suborbital hop. Shepard's Redstone rocket was strong enough to carry a capsule into space, but not powerful enough to push it into continuous orbit. To accomplish this, NASA had to rely on a larger, more complex Atlas rocket, a machine originally designed as an intercontinental ballistic missile, now adapted for peaceful exploration. The Atlas rocket brought new possibilities, but also new dangers. Engineers knew it had a history of instability, explosions, and structural weaknesses. It was called a balloon rocket because its thin metal skin was held rigid only by internal pressure, like a giant steel balloon. If pressure dropped or the structure bent, the rocket could collapse catastrophically. Despite these risks, it was the only available vehicle capable of carrying a Mercury capsule into orbit. NASA conducted numerous unmanned tests, each revealing new concerns: fuel leaks, engine shutdowns, heat shield flaws, and guidance errors. Every problem solved seemed to uncover 2 new ones. Yet behind every setback were teams of engineers and technicians working tirelessly to improve reliability. Astronauts played an essential role in the process. They provided feedback on cockpit layout, manual controls, emergency systems, and communication needs. They trained in pressure suits, isolation chambers, rotating chairs, and high-G centrifuges until their bodies ached. Simulators replicated emergencies again and again, forcing astronauts to think and react under immense pressure. The Mercury 7, Glenn, Shepard, Grissom, Carpenter, Slayton, Skira, and Cooper became national figures, but their fame masked the enormous physical and mental demands placed upon them. Their lives were a mix of patriotic duty, scientific experimentation, and intense public scrutiny. They knew that one mistake, one mechanical flaw, or one wrong calculation could end their lives instantly. America's first attempt at orbital flight came in 1961, but technical issues delayed the mission repeatedly. Engineers strengthened the Atlas rocket, upgraded the Mercury capsule's heat shield, and improved the tracking network that monitored spacecraft over the world. Families watched anxiously as countdowns began and were repeatedly halted. Citizens wondered whether the United States could actually pull off such a complicated mission. Inside NASA, the pressure was overwhelming. Everyone, from engineers to administrators to the astronauts themselves, understood that success would restore national pride, while failure could deepen the sense of being technologically behind the Soviet Union. Finally, after months of preparation, John Glenn was selected as the first American to attempt an orbital flight. The eyes of the nation were upon him, and the stakes could not have been higher. Glenn's mission would mark the beginning of a new chapter in American spaceflight, one that would demonstrate whether the Mercury program had overcome its early challenges and could truly stand alongside Soviet accomplishments. The stage was set for a moment that would change American history and reignite hope in the space race. On February 20th, 1962, millions of Americans gathered around radios, televisions, and newspapers, holding their breath as John Glenn prepared to launch aboard Friendship 7. Unlike previous missions, this launch carried enormous symbolic weight. If Glenn succeeded in orbiting Earth, the United States would finally prove that it could compete at the highest levels of space exploration. If he failed, the consequences would be deeply demoralizing. The Atlas rocket beneath him was powerful but notoriously unpredictable. Glenn, one of the most skilled pilots in America, understood the risks but faced them with remarkable calm and focus. At 9:47 a.m., the engines ignited and the Atlas rocket thundered upward. The ascent was violent, shaking the spacecraft and rattling Glenn, but within minutes, Friendship 7 reached orbit. The moment he reported, "0G and I feel fine," America erupted in celebration. Glenn was now traveling 17,500 miles per hour, circling Earth every 88 minutes. From space, he observed the breathtaking beauty of the planet. Sunsets spreading across the horizon, cloud patterns drifting over continents, and the curvature of Earth glowing with a thin blue line of atmosphere. His descriptions captivated the world, offering humanity a new perspective of its home. But the mission was far from smooth. During his second orbit, a warning light indicated a potential failure of the heat shield, the component responsible for protecting the capsule during the fiery re-entry through Earth's atmosphere. If the heat shield were loose, Glenn would almost certainly die upon descent. NASA controllers debated what to do, their voices tense and urgent. Should they command Glenn to eject early? Should they keep the retro rocket package attached to hold the heat shield in place? Glenn himself remained calm, continuing to carry out tasks, even while fully aware that a fatal malfunction might be unfolding beneath him. The decision was made to leave the unused retro rocket straps attached, hoping they would help secure the heat shield. As the capsule plunged back toward Earth, flames engulfed the windows, temperatures soared, and Glenn felt forces pressing heavily against his body. Communications crackled and went silent during the blackout period, leaving NASA unsure whether he had survived. Finally, parachute deployment was confirmed, and Friendship 7 drifted safely into the Atlantic Ocean. The nation cheered with relief and pride. Glenn emerged from the capsule smiling, instantly becoming a national hero and symbol of American determination. His accomplishment restored confidence across the United States. Schools celebrated, newspapers printed giant headlines, and Kennedy congratulated Glenn personally. The success of the mission marked a turning point. The Americans had proven they could place a human into orbit and bring him home safely. Though the Soviet Union remained ahead in cumulative achievements, the gap had narrowed. NASA now had momentum and public support, which would be crucial for the enormous goals that lay ahead: extended missions, new spacecraft designs, and ultimately, the challenge of reaching the moon. Glenn's flight also demonstrated the strength of human endurance in space. His clear thinking, emotional stability, and precision under pressure proved that astronauts could serve as active, decision-making pilots, not just passive observers. This confidence would influence future American spacecraft designs, ensuring that astronauts continued to play central roles in navigation and crisis management. As Glenn toured the country after his mission, he became an embodiment of courage, skill, and national pride, encouraging millions of young Americans to dream of becoming scientists, engineers, and explorers. The United States had re-entered the global competition with renewed energy, and the world took notice. While the United States celebrated John Glenn's successful orbital mission, the Soviet Union refused to let momentum shift toward its rival. Determined to maintain dominance in the space race, Soviet engineers and scientists accelerated their plans for more ambitious missions. They aimed to expand flight duration, test human limits, and push beyond the achievements of Vostok 1. Their strategy was simple: stay ahead by attempting missions the United States had not yet attempted, and do so quickly enough that American successes would be overshadowed by new Soviet milestones. The first major step was Vostok 2, launched in August 1961 with cosmonaut German Titov aboard. Titov became the second Soviet to orbit Earth, but his mission far surpassed Gagarin's 108-minute flight. Vostok 2 remained in orbit for more than 25 hours, completing 17 orbits around the planet. This demonstrated that humans could survive not just short missions, but extended exposure to weightlessness and isolation. Titov ate, slept, performed tasks, and even operated cameras, becoming the first person to film Earth from space. While he suffered from space sickness, his experience provided valuable biological and psychological data for future missions. Next came Vostok 3 and Vostok 4, launched within a day of each other in August 1962. This marked another historic first: simultaneous crewed flights, with two spacecraft orbiting Earth at the same time. Cosmonauts Andrei Nikolaev and Pavel Popovich communicated with each other from orbit, thrilling audiences around the world. Although the two capsules did not dock or meet closely, the mission proved that coordination between multiple spacecraft was possible, a crucial skill for future lunar and orbital station plans. The United States had not yet attempted anything so ambitious, and the Soviets proudly declared that they had once again expanded the boundaries of human spaceflight. These long-duration missions served not just scientific goals, but also political ones. Soviet leaders used them to claim global leadership in technology, hoping to influence developing nations during the Cold War. Success in space became a tool of diplomacy. Soviet achievements were broadcast in newspapers, radio programs, and political speeches as proof that socialism produced superior scientific results. Citizens across the USSR celebrated each launch with immense pride, viewing cosmonauts as courageous explorers representing the strength of their nation. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure was immense. Engineers scrambled to keep pace with politically demanded deadlines. Failures were often concealed, and risks were taken that would later trouble the program. But during the early 1960s, Soviet dominance appeared unstoppable. Their spacecraft were larger, their missions were longer, and they had already placed the first human in space. Now, they were exploring multi-day flights and simultaneous missions, areas the United States had not yet reached. The Soviet advances forced NASA to accelerate its own plans. The Americans realized that if they wanted to catch up and eventually surpass the USSR, they needed a new generation of spacecraft capable of more complex missions, longer durations, and more advanced maneuvering. This realization paved the way for the next major American program, Project Gemini, which would teach astronauts how to live and work in space long enough to one day reach the moon. By early 1958, the United States understood something painfully clear. The Soviet Union was leading the space race, and the gap was widening with every passing month. Sputnik had not only orbited Earth, it had orbited American confidence. The psychological shock was huge. Newspapers across the U.S. ran dramatic headlines like "Soviet rocket hurdles past U.S. science," and "America falls behind." Parents, teachers, scientists, and politicians all shared the same growing anxiety. If the Soviets could dominate space, they could dominate military power as well. To many Americans, the sky no longer felt like a symbol of limitless dreams. It felt like a battlefield where they were losing ground. The U.S. government knew that slow steps were no longer acceptable. Everything needed to accelerate research, funding, education, and even the pace of building new rockets. President Eisenhower approved a massive national initiative to reorganize space-related projects under one coordinated command. Until then, the Army, Navy, and Air Force had all been experimenting independently, which caused confusion and wasted time. The American public wanted a unified response, and quickly. This pressure created a dramatic shift in the political climate. Senators demanded hearings, scientists asked for more resources, and students across the nation suddenly expressed strong interest in science and engineering. One remarkable effect was the rise of STEM education. Schools introduced new courses in physics and mathematics, and national campaigns encouraged young people to consider scientific careers. Many historians later said that without the panic of Sputnik, the U.S. might never have invested so heavily in scientific growth. Behind closed doors, military leaders worried that the Soviets' ability to launch satellites also meant they could send nuclear weapons over long distances. This fear, known as the missile gap, pushed the U.S. to rapidly strengthen its rocket-building industries. Factories expanded, university laboratories received grants, and thousands of engineers were hired at places like Redstone Arsenal and Cape Canaveral. The country was waking up, and waking up fast. But catching up wasn't enough. The U.S. needed to leap ahead. Politicians and scientists agreed that the nation required a new identity to restore confidence. A national space agency that could unify all efforts, set ambitious goals, and prove to the world that America was still capable of leading technological progress. This sense of urgency set the stage for one of the most important creations in U.S. scientific history. A single agency that would soon change the world and take humanity further than anyone had ever imagined. On July 29, 1958, the United States officially created the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, a civilian-led agency with a mission that blended scientific exploration, technological advancement, and national security. NASA's birth was not just a bureaucratic decision. It was a symbol of America's determination to rise from the shock of Sputnik and become a serious competitor in space. When President Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act into law, newspapers described the moment as America's declaration of intent to reach beyond stars. NASA absorbed existing research agencies like NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, and merged them with military programs, laboratories, test sites, and thousands of scientists and engineers. For the first time, the United States had a centralized institution dedicated entirely to exploring the skies and beyond. Its early leaders emphasized that NASA's goals were peaceful and scientific, but everyone understood the deeper truth. The space race was still part of the Cold War, and showing strength in space meant showing strength on Earth. One of NASA's earliest tasks was organizing Project Mercury, the United States' first human spaceflight program. This ambitious effort aimed to send an American astronaut into orbit, return him safely, and gather vital knowledge about human survival in space. NASA also focused on improving the reliability of rockets, satellites, and communication systems. The agency faced overwhelming challenges, limited experience, tight deadlines, and public pressure, but the atmosphere inside its offices was electric. Scientists described the feeling as a national mission, something bigger than any single agency or team. NASA's creation also transformed American culture. The word astronaut, newly coined, stirred the imagination of millions. Children dreamed of flying among the stars, while adults watched every news update with fascination. Television channels broadcast rocket tests, press conferences, and interviews with scientists. Suddenly, space was not just something distant. It became a part of everyday conversation. In classrooms across the country, teachers used NASA's early missions as inspiration to teach physics, math, and engineering. Universities formed aerospace departments, and private companies rushed to build components for upcoming missions. NASA's influence extended far beyond research. It helped reshape the identity of the nation. America was stepping into a future where space exploration symbolized hope, competition, and technological progress. The world watched closely as NASA began its journey. The Soviet Union still held the lead, but the United States was now organized, determined, and moving quickly. The stage was set for a new chapter in the space race, one that would push human imagination to the limit. Despite NASA's formation and new resources, the United States still faced difficult challenges in 1958 and 1959. Early rocket tests remained risky, unpredictable, and often embarrassing. Some launches climbed only a few meters before exploding. Others soared beautifully into the sky, only to veer off course seconds later. Television audiences watched nervously as each mission attempted to prove that NASA could compete with the Soviets. Engineers joked that America had created a rocket graveyard near Cape Canaveral, where countless failed attempts dotted the shoreline. But each failure taught valuable lessons. Engineers learned how to stabilize rocket stages, adjust fuel mixtures, and redesign guidance systems. Every explosion, though painful, brought the United States one step closer to reliability. One notable improvement was the development of the Atlas rocket, which would eventually play a major role in sending astronauts into space. This period was filled with intense experimentation. Scientists were racing against not only the Soviets, but also their own technical limitations. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union continued to impress the world. They launched more advanced satellites, including Sputnik II carrying the dog Laika, proving that living creatures could survive in orbit. These achievements kept world attention fixed on the USSR, making the United States even more determined to achieve something groundbreaking. NASA knew that its upcoming missions needed to capture global interest and demonstrate undeniable progress. During this time, the American public gradually shifted from fear to excitement. They had witnessed NASA grow from an idea to a rapidly expanding organization filled with brilliant minds. Magazines published stories about rocket scientists, astronauts in training, and the challenges of surviving outside Earth's atmosphere. Children collected space-themed comic books and trading cards, while adults debated which nation would reach the moon first. Inside NASA, engineers and mission planners worked with relentless focus. They created test pilots training programs, selected the first group of astronauts, and refined flight procedures. These astronauts, later known as the Mercury 7, were already becoming national heroes even before stepping into a spacecraft. Their courage, discipline, and determination inspired millions. Although the United States had not yet achieved a major human spaceflight milestone, the foundation was ready. NASA had the people, the technology, and the national support needed. The mistakes of 1958 and 1959 were merely stepping stones toward greater achievements. The next phase of the space race would push America closer to orbit, closer to scientific greatness, and eventually closer to the moon itself. By 1959, the United States recognized that it needed more than rockets. It needed heroes. The Soviet Union had already stunned the world with its early satellite launches, and the next phase of the space race would involve something far more daring: sending a human into space. NASA knew this moment required individuals who could endure extreme danger and inspire the nation at the same time. Thus began the intense and historic selection process for America's first astronauts, eventually known as the Mercury 7. NASA engineers and military officials created strict, almost unbelievable requirements for the candidates. They needed to be under 40 years old, shorter than 5 feet 11 inches, and in extraordinary physical condition. They had to be test pilots with thousands of hours of flight experience, capable of making split-second decisions under heavy stress. This wasn't just a job. It was a mission that could easily end in disaster. Yet despite the risks, hundreds of pilots applied, showing how powerful the dream of spaceflight had become. The testing phase pushed the candidates to their limits. They underwent endurance trials where they were exposed to intense heat, freezing cold, and crushing pressure. Doctors measured their reactions to spinning machines designed to mimic the violent motions of rockets. Psychologists tested their memory, decision-making, and mental stability under stress. Some of the tests were so unusual that the pilots joked they felt like lab animals rather than elite aviators. When NASA finally revealed the 7 chosen astronauts, Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Walter Schirra, Alan Shepard, and Deke Slayton, the nation responded with tremendous excitement. Newspapers printed their faces on front pages, television channels ran special programs, and children memorized their names like they were superheroes. They were marketed as the brave pioneers who would carry America's hopes into the unknown. But behind the fame was enormous pressure. These men understood that every training session, every test flight, and every public appearance carried historic weight. If they failed, the United States could fall even further behind the Soviet Union. And if they succeeded, they would become the faces of American progress. The Mercury 7 were not only pilots. They were symbols of resilience, courage, and national pride. Their journey had only just begun, but already the world was watching closely. Once selected, the Mercury 7 entered a training program so demanding that many of them later described it as one of the hardest experiences of their lives. NASA knew that launching a human into space required an entirely new kind of preparation. No American had ever faced the intense acceleration of liftoff, the weightlessness of orbit, or the terrifying isolation of being alone above Earth. Every possible danger needed to be understood and rehearsed, even when the technology was still being invented on the spot. The astronauts trained inside mock-up Mercury capsules that were barely larger than a refrigerator. These small, cramped cabins forced them to practice operating controls with almost no room to move. NASA also used giant spinning machines called centrifuges to simulate the crushing forces of launch. The astronauts were hurled around at speeds that made their vision blur and their bodies feel impossibly heavy. Another part of their training involved survival exercises. NASA understood that if a mission went off course, a capsule might land in the ocean, the desert, the jungle, or even in freezing conditions. To prepare for anything, the Mercury 7 were dropped into forests, stranded on beaches, and placed in cold water for hours at a time. They learned how to use limited supplies, build shelters, and stay calm under extreme pressure. Weightlessness training became one of the most dramatic experiences. The astronauts boarded aircraft that flew in steep parabolic arcs, creating short periods of zero gravity. During these moments, they floated around the cabin like they were in space, learning to control their movements, position equipment, and keep their minds steady without the familiar sensation of gravity pulling them down. Meanwhile, NASA worked non-stop to improve the Mercury capsule and the rockets that would lift it. Engineers upgraded communication systems, heat shields, parachutes, and tracking networks. The astronauts spent countless hours with these engineers, giving feedback and learning exactly how every component worked. They understood that their lives depended on every bolt and wire functioning perfectly. Through all this training, a strong bond grew among the Mercury 7. They competed hard, encouraged each other, and pushed one another toward excellence. They were aware that only one of them would become the first American in space, but the sense of teamwork remained powerful. They were not just individuals. They were the faces of America's space future, united by a mission that would shape history. While the Mercury 7 trained tirelessly, another critical challenge unfolded behind the scenes, building rockets powerful enough and reliable enough to carry humans safely into space. The United States had already experienced many rocket failures during its early attempts, and now the stakes were higher than ever. A malfunction could cost not just equipment, but a human life and the reputation of America itself. NASA chose two main rockets for the Mercury program, the Redstone and the Atlas. The Redstone rocket, originally developed as a military missile, became the vehicle for the first suborbital missions. It was simpler, less powerful, and considered more reliable for early tests. Engineers modified it to carry a Mercury capsule instead of a warhead, adding safety systems and improving its structure. The Atlas rocket, however, was a different story. More powerful and more complex, it was capable of reaching the velocity needed for orbit, but it was also known for being unpredictable. Early Atlas tests often ended in fiery explosions that shook the ground at Cape Canaveral. Engineers worked tirelessly to strengthen the rocket's thin metal walls, refine its engines, and add emergency escape systems for the astronauts. The astronauts themselves insisted on being deeply involved in rocket development. They visited factories, inspected components, and demanded safety improvements. At first, some engineers thought the astronauts were interfering, but soon they realized that the pilots' insights were valuable. These men would be sitting inside the rockets. They had every reason to demand perfection. As testing continued, progress became clear. Launch after launch showed improvements in stability and reliability. Each success boosted national confidence and pushed NASA closer to its first manned mission. The public watched eagerly, cheering every successful test flight broadcast on television. By late 1959, NASA was ready for the next steps: animal flights, unmanned capsule tests, and finally, preparation for the first American to leave Earth. The rockets were improving, The astronauts were ready, and the nation was holding its breath for a moment that would define a generation. The world knew the Soviets were also preparing to send a man into space. The race was tightening. Every hour mattered. Every test mattered. And soon, one human life would be strapped inside a rocket, rising into the sky to rewrite history. By the start of 1960, NASA knew that the moment of truth was approaching. Before a human could be launched into space, countless safety checks, test flights, and system refinements had to be perfected. The world watched as both the United States and the Soviet Union raced toward one of the most historic milestones in human history, sending the first person beyond Earth's atmosphere. But the path to this achievement required testing the Mercury capsule with living passengers, animals, who could provide crucial data about the dangers and stresses of space travel. NASA used chimpanzees because of their similarity to humans in both behavior and biological responses. They needed to know how the brain, heart, muscles, and nervous system would react during launch, weightlessness, and re-entry. The conditions were extreme. Rockets produced enormous G-forces that compressed the body, while the violent shaking of early booster engines posed serious risks. If animals couldn't survive the experience, it was clear that humans wouldn't be safe either. One of the most important test flights occurred with a chimpanzee named Ham. Ham's training was intense and involved learning to respond to simple commands, pushing levers, and performing small tasks while strapped inside a simulator. NASA needed to see whether an astronaut could remain mentally alert and physically capable during the chaos of launch. Ham's flight in January 1961 was dramatic. Moments after launch, the rocket accelerated faster than expected, producing forces far stronger than the simulation predicted. Inside the capsule, Ham was being rattled with incredible pressure, yet he continued performing his tasks, proving that human astronauts could do the same. When Ham splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean, recovery teams discovered that the capsule had taken on water and was slowly sinking. Despite the danger, Ham was found alive, tired, shaken, but unharmed. His survival confirmed that the Mercury capsule's life support systems worked under real conditions, and his successful responses inside the capsule demonstrated that cognitive functioning remained possible during extreme stress. For NASA, this was a turning point. These animal flights, while controversial in modern discussions, were essential stepping stones. They provided invaluable data on biological stress, cabin design, oxygen levels, and emergency recovery procedures. Each mission improved the capsule's reliability, and each improvement brought NASA closer to sending a human astronaut into space. By late 1960, engineers were confident that the Mercury spacecraft was nearly ready. Heat shields had been strengthened, parachute systems fine-tuned, and communication networks upgraded. The global tracking system, an enormous network of antennas stretching around the world, was now prepared to monitor an astronaut's journey from launch to splashdown. America was standing on the edge of a new era. All that remained was choosing which astronaut would take the historic first step. Inside NASA, excitement mixed with tension. The Mercury's 7 astronauts all knew what was at stake. Whichever one was selected to fly first would forever be remembered as the American who carried the hopes of a nation into the sky. But the competition for that honor was fierce. Every astronaut trained relentlessly, hoping to prove he was the most capable and ready for the challenge. Yet NASA's final decision needed to be based not on fame or popularity, but on performance, physical condition, and psychological stability. 2 astronauts quickly became the strongest candidates, John Glenn and Alan Shepard. Glenn was charismatic, admired by the public, and respected by his fellow pilots. Shepard, however, was known for his precision, calmness under pressure, and unmatched ability to remain composed during chaotic test scenarios. NASA examined every detail: medical results, training performance, flight simulations, and personal discipline. Meanwhile, pressure from the political world intensified. The Soviet Union was also preparing to send a man into space, and American leaders feared that the USSR would succeed first, just as they had with Sputnik. The Cold War context made everything more urgent. Every delay, every setback, every technical issue felt like a potential national embarrassment. Despite the rivalry, the Mercury 7 maintained strong respect for one another. They ate together, trained together, and supported each other through demanding simulations. But each man also knew that history would remember the first American in space. That knowledge fueled their determination, pushing them to train harder than ever before. NASA also had to decide whether the first mission should attempt orbital flight or simply a suborbital hop into space. Engineers pushed for caution. They believed the safer first step was a suborbital trajectory, high enough to enter space but not fast enough to circle Earth. This reduced the risks of re-entry, heating, and communication blackout. The decision was pragmatic but frustrating for some astronauts who wanted to match the Soviets with an orbital mission. Ultimately, NASA selected Alan Shepard as the astronaut for the first American manned mission. The others supported the decision, though some had personal disappointment. Shepard spent days preparing, rehearsing, and mentally focusing. The training became more intense than ever. Every button, every switch, every emergency step was practiced repeatedly. He knew millions of Americans would be watching. He knew that history was waiting. But he also knew something even more pressing. The Soviet Union might still beat the United States to this achievement. No one realized how close that race truly was. Just as NASA finalized its preparations for Alan Shepard's mission, the Soviet Union delivered a shock that echoed across the world. On April 12, 1961, a calm, humble Soviet pilot named Yuri Gagarin climbed into the Vostok 1 spacecraft and became the first human being to travel into space. Not only did he reach space, he completed a full orbit around Earth, something the United States was not yet prepared to attempt. The announcement hit America like a thunderbolt. Radios interrupted broadcasts with breaking news. Television screens flashed messages. Soviet sends man into space. Newspapers printed headlines in giant letters. Across the United States, people felt a mix of awe, fear, and frustration. Once again, the Soviet Union had beaten them in a major milestone. Gagarin's achievement was extraordinary. He experienced weightlessness, watched Earth from above, and endured the fiery descent back through the atmosphere. The Soviet government celebrated him as a hero, and crowds flooded Moscow's streets to welcome him home. His smile became iconic worldwide, symbolizing Soviet triumph in the space race. Inside NASA, the mood was bittersweet. Engineers respected the Soviet accomplishment, understanding how difficult such a mission was. But they also felt the weight of national disappointment. Alan Shepard, waiting for his turn, now faced an even greater challenge. His mission would no longer be the first man in space. It would be America's response to Gagarin. Yet the pressure did not weaken America's resolve. If anything, Gagarin's flight motivated NASA to push even harder. The United States could not afford to remain second. The race was no longer about who reached space first. It was about who would explore deeper, reach farther, and ultimately win the quest for the moon. In just a few weeks, it would be Alan Shepard's turn to climb inside the Mercury capsule and roar into the sky. His mission would mark the beginning of America's rise, the moment when the United States finally stepped onto the path that would lead years later, to the surface of the moon. After Yuri Gagarin's historic orbital flight, the United States felt a renewed urgency. The pressure on NASA was intense. Politicians demanded quick action. The public wanted proof that America could compete, and the Mercury 7 astronauts, especially Alan Shepard, felt the weight of representing an entire nation. Shepard's upcoming mission, known as Mercury Redstone 3, would carry the capsule named Freedom 7. Even though the flight would be suborbital rather than orbital, it remained an enormous step for the United States. Success would show that America had the courage, technology, and determination to rise in the space race. Leading up to the launch, NASA's engineers worked day and night. They reviewed every bolt, sensor, valve, and control panel inside Freedom 7. Shepard participated in endless simulations, climbing into mock capsules, practicing radio calls, and preparing for emergencies. He trained for hours inside the centrifuge, experienced zero-gravity flights, and rehearsed water landings repeatedly. The strict discipline of the Mercury program made him confident, but also cautious. He knew the risks. Every astronaut understood that a single malfunction could mean disaster. Despite the pressure, Shepard kept his emotions controlled. He was known for his calmness and sharp focus. When asked by reporters about the danger, he simply replied, "This is what we trained for." He didn't show fear, but inside he recognized the reality. The Redstone rocket had a history of failures. Some early versions had exploded, tipped, or malfunctioned during test flights. The engineers had improved it dramatically, but perfection was never guaranteed. As the launch date approached, May 5th, 1961, the public's anticipation grew. People gathered around televisions and radios. Schools prepared to broadcast the event live. Families postponed errands so they wouldn't miss the moment. Across the world, journalists prepared headlines. Everyone understood. This was not just a space flight. It was the United States taking its first human step into the universe. The morning of the launch was filled with tension. Shepard woke up hours before sunrise, ate a light breakfast, and went through final medical checks. His heartbeat was steady, his voice calm. He put on his pressure suit, had it sealed and checked, and finally headed toward the launch pad. As he looked at the towering Redstone rocket, he felt excitement mixed with responsibility. He knew that millions of people were counting on him. The entire nation was about to watch him climb into that tiny capsule, sit in silence as the countdown ticked, and trust technology that had only recently begun to succeed. At the launch pad, Shepard climbed into Freedom 7 and was strapped tightly into his custom-fitted seat. He checked his switches, tested the radio channel, and completed the final procedures with precision. His pulse rose only slightly. Nothing unusual. Around him, engineers and technicians worked with flawless coordination. Every second mattered. Every decision needed to be perfect. And as the clock counted down toward zero, the world held its breath, waiting for the moment that would mark America's entry into human spaceflight. The final moments before liftoff were excruciatingly tense. Radio chatter became shorter, sharper, and more focused. Shepard waited inside his capsule, strapped in tightly, the sound of machinery humming around him. The sun was rising across Cape Canaveral, casting a golden glow on the launch tower. Millions of viewers watched live coverage. Entire classrooms went silent. The countdown reached the final numbers, 10, 9, 8, and Shepard's heart rate increased slightly. But his voice remained steady when he made the famous request. "Let's light this candle." At T0, the Redstone engine ignited with a powerful roar. Flames burst at the base of the rocket, shaking the ground and sending vibrations through Shepard's body. Slowly, almost cautiously, the rocket lifted off. For the first seconds, Shepard felt the intense push of acceleration as the Redstone gained thrust. He described the early moments as a smooth but powerful ride, though the forces were strong enough to make speech difficult. As Freedom 7 climbed higher, Shepard experienced increasing G-forces pressing him into his seat. The sky outside his small window shifted from blue to a darker shade. Shepard monitored his gauges, checked engine performance, and maintained communication with Mission Control. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. After 142 seconds, the Redstone engine shut down. Shepard felt a sudden shift, weightlessness. For the first time, an American human being floated freely in space. Inside the Mercury capsule, Shepard looked out at Earth through his periscope. He saw the curvature of the planet, the deep black of space, and the bright sunlight reflecting off the atmosphere. His voice carried excitement as he reported, "What a beautiful view." The flight lasted only about 15 minutes, but every second was packed with scientific observation and personal wonder. Shepard tested the capsule's controls, adjusted his orientation, and confirmed that humans could function normally in space. The view was breathtaking. The horizon appeared sharply curved, with clouds drifting across the blue Earth. Shepard described the colors, visibility, and his physical sensations for NASA, providing valuable data. Although he was not in orbit, the experience still represented a major breakthrough. America had put a man into space, and he was safe, conscious, and in full control. As the capsule reached its peak altitude of about 116 miles, 187 kilometers, gravity began pulling it back toward Earth. Shepard braced himself as the capsule re-entered the atmosphere. Flames heated the exterior, and vibrations shook the craft. But the heat shield held firm. The parachutes deployed flawlessly, slowing Freedom 7's descent. Moments later, the capsule splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean. Shepard radioed calmly. "Everything A-OK." Recovery helicopters arrived quickly, lifting both the astronaut and the capsule safely aboard ship. The mission had lasted just over 15 minutes, but it became one of the most iconic moments in American history. The United States had finally sent a human into space. The impact of Shepard's flight was immediate and powerful. Across the United States, cheers erupted. People celebrated in homes, schools, cafes, and workplaces. Newspapers released special editions. Television networks replayed the launch again and again. Alan Shepard became a national hero overnight. Children looked up to him with admiration. Adults felt pride and relief, and NASA engineers were applauded for their hard work. For the first time in years, many Americans felt that the country was regaining momentum in the space race. President John F. Kennedy personally congratulated Shepard and later held a ceremony at the White House. During the celebrations, Shepard was humble, thanking the thousands of engineers, technicians, and scientists who made the mission possible. He made it clear that the success belonged not to him alone, but to the entire nation. His professionalism, discipline, and courage inspired millions. But even in the middle of celebration, something else was happening inside the minds of America's leaders. Gagarin had orbited Earth. Shepard had completed a suborbital flight. The Soviet Union still held the advantage. And although Shepard's success was historic, it wasn't enough to fully catch up. NASA needed a bold, ambitious objective, something so large that it could push the nation far ahead of the Soviets. 4 weeks after Shepard's flight, on May 25, 1961, President Kennedy stood before Congress and made a daring announcement. He proposed that the United States should commit itself to the goal of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before the decade was out. His words electrified the nation. The moon, something humans had observed for thousands of years, was now being announced as a reachable destination. NASA suddenly had a new mission, one far bigger than anything it had ever attempted. The engineering challenges were enormous. Rockets needed to be far more powerful than the Redstone or Atlas. Spacecraft needed to be larger, safer, and capable of long-duration flight. Navigation systems had to be invented. Training programs had to expand. Entire new facilities, laboratories, and factories were required. It would be the most demanding scientific project in human history. But Americans embraced the challenge. Shepard's flight gave the nation confidence, and Kennedy's lunar goal gave it purpose. The space race was no longer simply about reaching space. It had become a race to the moon itself. After Alan Shepard's successful suborbital mission, NASA had proven it could send a human into space and bring him home safely. But the Soviets were still far ahead. They had already placed Yuri Gagarin in orbit, something the United States had not yet achieved. To catch up, NASA needed to send an astronaut around Earth, not just up and back down. The responsibility for this crucial mission fell on John Glenn, a former Marine pilot, test pilot, and one of the most admired members of the Mercury 7. Preparing for an orbital flight was far more complicated than sending someone on a short suborbital trip. For orbit, everything needed to be perfect. The rocket, the capsule, the heat shield, the guidance systems, the communications, and the recovery teams. Unlike Shepard's 15-minute mission, an orbital flight would last several hours and involve multiple passes around Earth. NASA had to be absolutely certain that Glenn could survive, that the spacecraft could endure the conditions, and that the systems would continue functioning long enough to complete the mission. The rocket selected for this mission was the Atlas LV-3B, a powerful launcher originally developed as an intercontinental ballistic missile. However, the Atlas had a troubling history. Several test flights had ended in explosions, structural failures, or fuel problems. Engineers spent months reinforcing the vehicle, testing the engines, and upgrading the abort systems. Glenn understood the risks, but trusted the engineers. His calm confidence reassured the public, who saw him as the ideal person to represent American courage and determination. Meanwhile, Glenn trained tirelessly. He practiced manual reentry procedures, studied orbital mechanics, and drilled emergency scenarios until they became instinct. He learned to recognize even the smallest system malfunction. He spent hours inside the capsule simulator, rehearsing every step of the mission. Physically and mentally, he was prepared, but the constant delays caused by weather, equipment checks, and rocket concerns weighed on him. American citizens grew impatient, watching the Soviets achieve more milestones while the United States waited for the perfect launch day. Finally, after months of postponements, NASA scheduled the mission. February 20th, 1962. The country held its breath. Schools planned to broadcast the launch live. News reporters prepared special coverage. People set alarms to wake up early. The sense of anticipation spread across America like electricity. The night before the launch, Glenn slept calmly, waking before sunrise to begin his final preparations. He ate a light breakfast, donned his silver spacesuit, and underwent medical checks. Then he made his way to launch Complex 14. As he approached the towering Atlas rocket, shining white against the morning sky, he felt a mixture of respect and confidence. He was about to become the first American to orbit Earth. Everything he had trained for would come down to the next few hours. John Glenn climbed into a spacecraft named Friendship 7 and settled into the pilot's seat. Technicians sealed the hatch and performed final inspections. Glenn went through his checklist with steady precision, reporting switch positions, pressure readings, and communication status. His voice was calm, even as millions listened in. Outside, the Atlas rocket stood ready, venting cold vapor as liquid oxygen chilled the metal skin. As the countdown reached the final seconds, 10, 9, 8, Glenn prepared himself for the powerful liftoff. At T0, the engines ignited, producing a massive burst of fire and sound. The rocket lifted off slowly but steadily, rising into the sky as Glenn felt the intense acceleration push him back into his seat. The ride was thrilling but violent. The Atlas vibrated heavily, shaking the capsule with every second of ascent. Glenn read off data calmly, even as the forces grew stronger. Once the booster engines separated and the Atlas continued upward, the flight became smoother. Glenn monitored fuel levels, engine performance, and cabin pressure. He saw the sky turn from blue to dark purple and finally to the blackness of space. When the rocket reached orbital velocity, the boosters shut down, and Glenn felt a sudden sensation of weightlessness. Friendship 7 was officially in orbit. The moment was historic. John Glenn had become the first American to orbit Earth. As the spacecraft traveled around the planet at more than 17,000 miles per hour, Glenn observed the breathtaking view below him. He saw coastlines, clouds drifting across oceans, patterns of sunlight on the water, and the thin blue layer of the atmosphere. He reported everything to NASA: the color changes, the visibility, the clarity. His voice carried a sense of wonder that struck millions listening around the world. But the mission was not without danger. Early in the flight, controllers noticed a concerning signal from the heat shield sensor. It suggested that the heat shield might not be secure. If it detached during re-entry, Glenn would not survive. NASA decided to keep the problem secret from Glenn at first, not wanting to distract him. Later, they cautiously gave him partial information and instructed him to keep the retro pack attached during re-entry as an extra layer of protection. Despite the risk, Glenn remained composed. He continued to operate the spacecraft, manually orienting it when necessary. He orbited Earth 3 times, performing experiments, taking observations, and maintaining stable systems. His professionalism impressed NASA and reassured the nation. After nearly 5 hours in space, it was time to return to Earth. Glenn prepared for re-entry, bracing himself for the intense heat and deceleration. The capsule plunged into the atmosphere, flames engulfing the exterior. Communications blacked out temporarily, as expected. When contact resumed, Glenn's calm voice confirmed that he was okay. Minutes later, parachutes deployed, and Friendship 7 drifted gently toward the Atlantic Ocean. Recovery teams located the capsule and airlifted Glenn to safety. The United States celebrated its first orbital astronaut. John Glenn's return sparked a wave of emotion across the country. People cheered in the streets, newspapers printed giant headlines, and television networks replayed the footage again and again. Glenn instantly became one of the most famous Americans of his generation. Schools discussed his mission. Children drew pictures of Friendship 7, and adults spoke proudly of America's achievements. Glenn's courage and calmness embodied the spirit of exploration. President Kennedy welcomed Glenn with honor and gratitude. Parades were held in several major cities, drawing millions of people. Glenn rode through streets filled with waving flags and cheering crowds. His smile, modest personality, and heroic status made him a national symbol of hope and progress. He became a global ambassador for American space exploration. But beyond the celebrations, NASA saw Glenn's flight as a starting point, not the finish line. Orbiting Earth had brought the United States closer to the Soviet Union, but the next goals were much more challenging. NASA needed longer missions, more complex spacecraft, stronger rockets, and new techniques for navigation and rendezvous. They needed astronauts who could work in space for days, not minutes. They needed machines that could dock, maneuver, and survive extreme environments. And above all, they needed to prepare for the bold promise made by Kennedy, landing a human on the moon before 1970. To achieve this, NASA began expanding dramatically. New astronauts were recruited. New vehicles were designed. Engineers worked on the Gemini program, which would test long-duration flight, spacewalking, docking, and orbital maneuvering, skills essential for the future Apollo missions. Factories operated day and night. Universities contributed research. The effort was national, massive, and urgent. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union continued its own series of successes. They launched more cosmonauts, tested longer missions, and explored new technologies. The space race intensified, pushing both nations to invest enormous resources into space exploration. Every achievement, every failure, and every launch shaped the course of history. But Glenn's flight marked a turning point. It proved that America could reach orbit, operate spacecraft reliably, and keep astronauts safe. It restored national confidence and strengthened NASA's commitment to the moon. After John Glenn's historic orbital flight, NASA recognized that simply sending astronauts into orbit was no longer sufficient. The agency now faced the enormous challenge of preparing humans to travel to the moon, an endeavor far more complex than brief flights around Earth. To accomplish this, NASA needed a new program, one that could teach astronauts how to live in space for extended periods, maneuver spacecraft precisely, and perform critical operations such as docking and spacewalking. This was the birth of Project Gemini, NASA's bridge from Mercury to the Apollo lunar missions. Project Gemini, formally approved in 1962, represented a dramatic leap forward in technology and training. Unlike Mercury, which involved single astronauts on short suborbital orbits, Gemini missions were designed for two-person crews and longer durations, lasting from several days to nearly 2 weeks. This extended time in space allowed scientists and engineers to study how humans coped with the effects of weightlessness over longer periods, including muscle atrophy, fluid shifts, and psychological stress. Gemini would also test orbital rendezvous techniques, an absolutely essential capability for the upcoming lunar missions, where spacecraft needed to dock in orbit before heading to the moon. The spacecraft themselves were significantly more sophisticated than Mercury capsules. Gemini capsules were larger, allowing 2 astronauts to operate the vehicle together. They featured advanced life support systems, maneuvering thrusters, more precise instruments, and the capability to perform controlled re-entries with greater accuracy. NASA engineers also prioritized safety, integrating multiple redundant systems to protect astronauts from potential hazards, including cabin depressurization, heat shield failure, or guidance errors. These innovations were a direct response to lessons learned from both Mercury flights and Soviet space experiences. Training for Gemini was equally rigorous. Astronauts spent countless hours in simulators that replicated emergencies, orbital maneuvers, and spacecraft operations. They practiced docking with mock spacecraft and pools to simulate zero gravity, performed high-G centrifuge tests to prepare for launch and re-entry, and rehearsed extravehicular activities in neutral buoyancy tanks. Gemini astronauts also underwent psychological evaluation to ensure they could handle long periods of confinement and isolation. NASA understood that every mistake could be fatal and that success depended on both human skill and machine reliability. Internationally, the Gemini program was closely watched. The Soviets continued to push their space program forward, achieving longer duration flights and testing new spacecraft technologies. American engineers and officials felt a sense of urgency. They could not afford delays. Gemini needed to demonstrate that the United States could not only put humans in orbit, but also conduct the precise maneuvers required for lunar exploration. Failure was not an option. One of the most critical goals of Project Gemini was perfecting orbital rendezvous and docking. This capability was essential for future moon missions, where astronauts would transfer between lunar modules and command modules in orbit. Unlike the Mercury program, where a single spacecraft simply orbited Earth and returned, Gemini required precise calculations, pilot skill, and spacecraft control to allow two vehicles to meet and link in orbit. The first attempts at rendezvous were highly technical. NASA designed simulations in which astronauts had to approach a target spacecraft, calculate relative velocity, and adjust orientation and thrust in real time. These operations demanded perfect understanding of orbital mechanics, because even small errors could result in drifting too far from the target or colliding catastrophically. Engineers relied on computers to provide calculations, but astronauts still had to manually control thrusters to complete the maneuver safely. Gemini 6 and Gemini 7, flown in 1965, achieved one of the first major rendezvous successes. Gemini 7 was a long-duration mission, staying in orbit for 14 days, while Gemini 6, launched just days later, successfully maneuvered to meet and station keep with Gemini 7. This achievement demonstrated that NASA could control spacecraft precisely in orbit and maintain contact between two vehicles, a vital skill for Apollo missions. For the first time, humans could operate vehicles in orbit as if they were pilots, not passengers. Docking came next. Gemini 8, piloted by Neil Armstrong and David Scott, became the first mission to successfully dock with another spacecraft in March 1966. The docking marked a historic technical achievement. It required careful control of thrusters, attention to relative motion, and split-second adjustments. However, the mission also demonstrated the risks involved. Shortly after docking, a thruster malfunction caused the combined spacecraft to spin uncontrollably. Armstrong's calm actions corrected the problem and saved the mission. This incident underscored the extreme challenges of space operations and highlighted the importance of rigorous astronaut training, decision-making under pressure, and reliable engineering. Gemini missions also expanded knowledge of human endurance. Astronauts spent up to 2 weeks in microgravity, conducting scientific experiments, monitoring life support systems, and observing the effects of prolonged spaceflight. They performed extravehicular activities, EVAs, or spacewalks, which required mastering movement and tool usage while exposed to the vacuum of space. These spacewalks were physically and psychologically challenging, but essential for testing procedures for future lunar exploration. NASA learned to manage human fatigue, suit limitations, and coordination between astronauts inside and outside the spacecraft. The Gemini program not only prepared astronauts for Apollo, but also proved that complex, multi-stage missions were achievable. Each mission built on the last, refining techniques, improving spacecraft systems, and boosting confidence in American space capabilities. Gemini bridged the gap between initial orbital flights and the ambitious goal of landing humans on the moon. By the end of Project Gemini in 1966, NASA had achieved a remarkable series of milestones. Rendezvous, docking, long-duration flights, and EVAs had all been successfully tested. The Mercury astronauts had become experienced spacefarers, capable of handling emergencies and performing technical tasks in orbit. Gemini established the foundation for Apollo by providing invaluable data on spacecraft systems, human endurance, and operational procedures. It also taught the United States critical lessons about risk management, coordination, and the limits of human capability in space. The program's success was also a major morale boost. For Americans, it demonstrated that their country could compete directly with the Soviets in a highly technical arena. National pride surged as the world witnessed these new feats. Internationally, Gemini made it clear that the space race was accelerating. Allies and rivals alike were observing with admiration and strategic concern. The Soviets had achieved remarkable early milestones, but Gemini showed that the United States was now capable of precise orbital maneuvers and extended space operations, skills essential for future moon missions. Gemini also transformed public perception of astronauts. These men were no longer just test pilots. They were pioneers, explorers, and national icons. Media coverage highlighted not only their technical accomplishments, but also their courage, discipline, and adaptability. The Mercury 7 continued to inspire, while newer Gemini astronauts became household names. Schools, magazines, and television programs fueled interest in science, mathematics, and engineering. NASA's achievements helped shape a generation of future scientists, engineers, and astronauts. From a technological perspective, Gemini revealed areas needing improvement. Life support systems had to handle longer durations, guidance computers needed refinement, and spacecraft structural integrity was constantly assessed. Every mission contributed lessons that would later save lives during Apollo. Engineers learned to anticipate failures, integrate redundancies, and improve astronaut interface with controls, knowledge that became critical during the lunar missions. The global space race intensified. While the United States was making steady, methodical progress, the Soviet Union continued with long-duration flights and advanced spacecraft development. Both nations were testing human limits and engineering capabilities. Gemini's success reassured Americans that, despite past Soviet lead, the United States was now a serious contender. It was prepared not just to orbit Earth, but to reach the moon. The next step was clear: Apollo. Gemini had provided the knowledge, confidence, and operational experience necessary to attempt what had seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The moon was no longer a distant dream. It was a reachable objective. And with Gemini as its proving ground, NASA was ready to make history. The successful Mercury and Gemini missions laid the groundwork, but the United States' ultimate challenge remained the most ambitious goal in human history: landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. President John F. Kennedy had articulated this vision in his historic May 25, 1961 speech before Congress, but transforming words into reality required more than inspiration. It required unprecedented resources, coordination, and technological ingenuity. The Apollo program was born to turn that vision into reality, an undertaking larger than any space mission undertaken before. Apollo's mission was far more complex than any previous flight. While Mercury focused on proving humans could survive short trips into space, and Gemini taught extended operations and orbital maneuvering, Apollo aimed for lunar orbit and landing. Engineers had to solve problems previously thought impossible: building rockets capable of escaping Earth's gravity, developing a lunar module to land astronauts safely on an airless surface, and ensuring that life support systems could sustain humans for days away from Earth. The stakes were enormous. Failure at any stage could result not only in death, but in catastrophic national humiliation. NASA faced the challenge of designing new hardware from scratch. The Saturn V rocket, conceived by Wernher von Braun and his team at the Marshall Space Flight Center, became the central tool for Apollo. This rocket needed to be the most powerful ever built, capable of lifting massive spacecraft, fuel, and supplies into orbit and beyond. Its design required multiple stages, complex fuel systems, and redundancies to prevent catastrophic failure. Engineers worked tirelessly to design, test, and refine each component. Thousands of scientists, technicians, and contractors contributed, creating one of the largest collaborative scientific efforts in history. Meanwhile, astronauts were carefully selected and trained for Apollo missions. Lessons from Mercury and Gemini informed training programs. Astronauts had to master spacecraft systems, orbital mechanics, lunar landing procedures, and survival techniques in case of emergencies on the moon or during re-entry. Training was intense, incorporating simulations, zero-gravity flights, and emergency drills. Psychological readiness was as important as technical skill, given the isolation and stress of long-duration lunar missions. Public and political support was critical. Kennedy's speech had rallied the nation, but Apollo demanded enormous funding, billions of dollars over the decade. Critics argued that space exploration was expensive, unnecessary, or politically motivated. Yet Kennedy and NASA emphasized the symbolic, scientific, and strategic importance of beating the Soviet Union to the moon. The Cold War context made Apollo not just a scientific endeavor, but also a demonstration of American technological and ideological superiority. By the mid-1960s, Apollo had transformed from a visionary idea into a tangible program with rockets, spacecraft, astronauts, and laboratories dedicated to the lunar goal. Testing began on components, engines, and spacecraft systems. The race was no longer theoretical. It was measurable, urgent, and intensely competitive. Every launch, every test, and every spacecraft design decision brought NASA closer to humanity's first steps on another world. Designing the Apollo spacecraft and Saturn V rocket presented unprecedented technical challenges. The spacecraft consisted of three components: the command module, CM, for astronaut control and re-entry; the service module, SM, providing propulsion, power, and life support; and a lunar module, LM, designed specifically for landing on the moon. Each had to operate flawlessly in extreme conditions. Engineers faced questions about fuel mixtures, structural integrity, radiation shielding, and re-entry heat protection that had never been solved before. The Saturn V rocket became the centerpiece of Apollo's success. Standing over 360 feet tall, it was a marvel of engineering and industrial coordination. Its three stages required hundreds of engines, millions of parts, and a highly precise assembly process. Even minor errors could lead to catastrophic failure. Wernher von Braun, along with his team of German and American engineers, faced immense pressure to deliver a rocket capable of lifting over 100 tons of payload into orbit. Testing the engines, conducting static fires, and simulating launches consumed years of work. Failures were common, but each one led to refinements that increased safety and reliability. NASA also had to master complex mission planning. Unlike Mercury or Gemini, Apollo missions involved multiple spacecraft operating together in orbit. The lunar module had to detach from the command module, land precisely on the moon, and then return to dock with the command module in lunar orbit. Timing, navigation, and propulsion had to be exact. Mission planners developed meticulous procedures accounting for gravity, fuel consumption, and orbital mechanics. Simulations and ground testing became critical to prevent errors during actual missions. Apollo captured the imagination of the American public in ways unprecedented in history. Schools organized Space Week, events, children drew rockets and astronauts, and entire cities hosted parades celebrating NASA personnel. Television programs regularly broadcast training sessions, spacecraft assembly, and astronaut interviews. The Mercury and Gemini successes had proven that American spaceflight was real. Apollo now promised a human presence on the moon, a goal once considered impossible. Citizens followed every Saturn V test, rocket assembly, and simulation with near religious fervor. Families gathered to watch launches, and newspaper editorials debated the technical and political implications of lunar exploration. The Cold War intensified the stakes. Space exploration was not merely scientific, it was symbolic. Each nation sought to demonstrate technological superiority, ideological dominance, and military capability. Rockets that could send astronauts to the moon could also launch nuclear warheads halfway around the globe. Winning the space race would signal national strength, innovation, and global leadership. The United States and the Soviet Union competed fiercely in a domain that transcended geography, making every Apollo development politically critical. Media coverage emphasized both the risks and rewards. The tragic Apollo 1 fire highlighted the dangers, reminding Americans that lunar exploration was perilous. But each successful test flight, each Saturn V launch, and each spacecraft assembly milestone inspired hope. The public perceived NASA as a symbol of national resilience, technological achievement, and visionary ambition. Astronauts became cultural icons, celebrated not just as engineers or pilots, but as representatives of human courage and ingenuity. Simultaneously, the Apollo program stimulated advancements beyond aerospace. Universities conducted research in materials science, electronics, and computer systems, often funded by NASA contracts. Industries developed new manufacturing processes, lightweight alloys, and precision electronics. These innovations had applications far beyond spaceflight, transforming everyday life in unexpected ways. Apollo's influence extended into education, the economy, and culture, making it a centerpiece of American identity during the 1960s. By 1966, the United States was poised at a critical juncture. Saturn V rockets were being tested, lunar modules were nearing readiness, and astronauts were trained for extended missions. The Cold War rivalry pushed NASA to accelerate progress, but public enthusiasm and political support ensured that the program continued with unmatched focus. The nation had moved from watching Mercury capsules orbit Earth to envisioning humans walking on the moon, a leap in both ambition and capability. The stage was set for the first manned Apollo missions, the Apollo 7 through Apollo 10 series, which would test spacecraft, rendezvous procedures, and lunar orbits. The lessons from these missions would be vital for the ultimate goal, Apollo 11 and the historic moon landing. NASA was prepared, the astronauts were ready, and the world waited with anticipation for the next chapter in the space race. After the tragic Apollo 1 fire in 1967, NASA faced a monumental challenge: regaining public trust, improving spacecraft safety, and resuming manned flights. The fire had killed Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee during a ground test, revealing serious flaws in cabin design, wiring, and emergency protocols. Engineers immediately redesigned the Apollo command module with improved materials, better wiring insulation, revised hatches for rapid egress, and stricter safety standards. It took over a year of testing, verification, and extensive simulations before NASA was confident that astronauts could safely enter space. The stage was now set for Apollo 7, the first manned flight after the disaster. Apollo 7's mission, launched on October 11, 1968, was not designed for lunar landing, but to test the redesigned command module in Earth orbit. The crew, Walter Skura, Don Isley, and Walter Cunningham, had to verify life support systems, propulsion, communication, and guidance controls over a 10-day mission. NASA engineers demanded absolute precision. Any error could jeopardize not only the mission, but also confidence in the entire Apollo program. The astronauts trained relentlessly, running countless simulations of orbital maneuvers, emergency procedures, and spacecraft operations. Each scenario was designed to simulate real-world conditions, including power failures, navigation challenges, and prolonged periods in microgravity. The launch itself marked a major milestone. Saturn IB rockets, a smaller but highly capable variant of the Saturn V, delivered Apollo 7 into orbit. The astronauts felt the powerful acceleration, experienced weightlessness, and immediately began testing systems. Communications with mission control were flawless, demonstrating that the spacecraft could support extended crew operations. Throughout the mission, the crew reported detailed observations on spacecraft performance, cabin atmosphere, and equipment functionality, ensuring that Apollo could safely proceed toward more complex missions. NASA closely monitored heart rates, oxygen consumption, and stress levels, confirming that humans could endure longer missions with minimal risk. Apollo 7's success restored confidence across NASA, the government, and the American public. Engineers celebrated the validation of the redesigned command module, while astronauts proved that prolonged orbital operations were feasible. News outlets highlighted the return to safe, reliable spaceflight, emphasizing that the program had learned from past failures. Apollo 7 laid the foundation for subsequent missions, demonstrating that the United States could maintain both technological precision and crew safety, key requirements for the lunar landing. The mission symbolized resilience, determination, and America's commitment to winning the space race. With the success of Apollo 7, NASA accelerated its schedule, aiming to achieve lunar orbit before attempting a landing. This ambitious goal led to Apollo 8, launched on December 21st, 1968. The mission would carry astronauts Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Anders around the moon, testing navigation, spacecraft systems, and communication at unprecedented distances. Unlike Apollo 7, this mission was far riskier, as the crew would travel hundreds of thousands of miles from Earth, entering an environment where immediate rescue was impossible. Apollo 8 represented a bold leap in both ambition and national pride. The preparation for Apollo 8 was intensive. Astronauts trained in simulators replicating lunar approach, orbital insertion, and re-entry procedures. Engineers refined the Saturn V rocket, ensuring reliable ignition, stage separation, and trajectory calculations. Every aspect of navigation, from lunar orbit insertion to precise return trajectories, was rigorously tested using both computers and human oversight. Mission planners also coordinated tracking stations around the globe to maintain constant communication with the spacecraft, an essential element for mission success. On December 21st, 1968, the Saturn V lifted off from Kennedy Space Center, propelling Apollo 8 toward history. The crew endured intense acceleration and vibration during ascent, then entered Earth orbit before performing a translunar injection burn, sending the spacecraft toward the moon. As they approached lunar orbit, the astronauts marveled at the sight of the moon's rugged surface, craters, and plains, a view no human had ever witnessed firsthand. The spacecraft completed 10 lunar orbits, testing communication, navigation, and orbital maneuvering. The mission was also critical for understanding radiation exposure, thermal conditions, and the performance of life support systems in deep space. Apollo 8's achievements had profound implications. The crew captured the iconic photograph of Earth rising over the moon's horizon, symbolizing the fragility and unity of humanity. The mission demonstrated that NASA could navigate the moon, maintain spacecraft integrity, and sustain astronauts in deep space. For the United States, Apollo 8 was a monumental psychological victory over the Soviet Union. It proved that American technology, courage, and planning could operate beyond Earth orbit, setting the stage for the eventual lunar landing. The mission inspired a nation and reassured the world that the moon was within reach. Following Apollo 8, NASA focused on refining the procedures necessary for a safe moon landing. Two critical missions, Apollo 9 and Apollo 10, tested lunar module operations in Earth orbit and in lunar orbit respectively. These missions ensured astronauts could control the lunar module, perform dockings, and rehearse descent and ascent maneuvers required for a landing. Both missions were essential steps toward Apollo 11 and the historic first moon landing. Apollo 9, launched in March 1969, involved the first flight of the lunar module LM in Earth orbit. Astronauts James McDivitt, David Scott, and Rusty Schweickart tested docking maneuvers between the command module and lunar module, simulating the procedures needed to separate and reunite spacecraft in orbit. The mission also tested life support systems, navigation controls, and EVA operations for lunar surface activity. Challenges included managing spacecraft systems under zero-gravity conditions and handling the intricacies of docking procedures. Each success increased confidence in NASA's ability to execute lunar operations safely. Apollo 10, launched in May 1969, was effectively a dress rehearsal for the lunar landing. Astronauts Thomas Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan piloted the lunar module close to the moon's surface without actually landing. The mission validated descent trajectories, landing radar operations, and engine burns required for the final lunar landing. Apollo 10 also confirmed that communications and navigation systems could function in lunar orbit. Engineers, astronauts, and mission planners gathered vast amounts of critical data, addressing small anomalies to refine procedures for Apollo 11. The mission demonstrated that the United States was fully prepared for a manned moon landing. By mid-1969, the stage was set. The Saturn V rocket had proven capable. The lunar module had been tested in orbit, and astronauts had rehearsed every maneuver required for a successful landing. Apollo missions had not only advanced technical knowledge, but also inspired global attention and national pride. NASA had transitioned from exploratory orbital missions to the brink of humanity's first steps on another world. The moon was no longer a distant goal. It was a destination awaiting the courage and skill of the next astronauts who would take the historic journey. By 1969, NASA had successfully completed the Mercury, Gemini, and early Apollo test programs, paving the way for the first lunar landing. The ultimate mission, Apollo 11, required meticulous planning, unprecedented coordination, and the selection of a crew capable of handling the immense pressures of humanity's most ambitious journey. The astronauts chosen were Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, each with specific roles critical to the mission's success. Neil Armstrong, the commander, was selected for his calm demeanor, exceptional piloting skills, and ability to make critical decisions under extreme pressure. Armstrong had proven himself in Gemini 8, where he performed an emergency orbital maneuver that saved both astronauts and spacecraft. Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, was a rigorous engineer with expertise in orbital rendezvous and docking, honed through both Gemini training and extensive simulations. Michael Collins, the command module pilot, would remain in lunar orbit while Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the moon's surface, operating the command module and ensuring a safe return. Together, the three astronauts represented an ideal combination of skill, experience, and teamwork. NASA's planners faced extraordinary challenges. Apollo 11 would travel over 240,000 miles from Earth to the Moon, requiring precise trajectory calculations for launch, translunar injection, lunar orbit insertion, descent, landing, ascent, and return. Each phase depended on highly accurate navigation, precise engine burns, and real-time problem solving. Failure in any system could prove catastrophic. Engineers relied on the Saturn V rocket, the most powerful ever built, to lift the Apollo spacecraft into orbit. The rocket's 3 stages had to perform flawlessly, carrying the command module, service module, and lunar module on a coordinated trajectory toward the moon. Extensive simulations ensured that the crew could handle every anticipated scenario, from equipment failures to life support malfunctions. The astronauts practiced emergency landings, lunar surface maneuvers, and communications protocols. Mission Control in Houston worked closely with the crew to develop detailed procedures, contingency plans, and coordinated timelines. Every aspect of the mission, from the pre-launch checklist to the lunar ascent, was meticulously rehearsed in both simulators and test flights. Engineers also implemented redundant systems, ensuring that backup controls could maintain the mission in case of hardware failure. In addition to technical preparation, NASA had to consider the public and political implications. The Cold War context added enormous pressure. Success would demonstrate American technological superiority and inspire national pride, while failure would be a global embarrassment. Worldwide media attention was intense, with journalists, television crews, and public officials tracking progress daily. The Apollo 11 crew faced not only technical challenges, but also the responsibility of representing humanity on the global stage. This was more than a mission. It was a historic moment that would define the space age. As launch day approached, the astronauts conducted final physical and psychological evaluations, reviewed mission procedures, and observed the Saturn V rocket at Kennedy Space Center. The tension was palpable. Millions of Americans and people worldwide anxiously anticipated the journey. NASA had tested every possible scenario, yet the uncertainty of deep space operations remained. Apollo 11 was about to attempt something no human had ever done, venturing into the unknown with courage, precision, and a sense of history that weighed heavily on every participant. On July 16, 1969, the countdown reached 0, and the Saturn V rocket ignited, lifting Apollo 11 into the sky with a roar that shook the ground and echoed for miles. Millions of viewers across the United States and around the world watched live as the massive rocket ascended into the clear Florida sky. The launch was flawless, the massive engines performing exactly as planned. Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins experienced extreme acceleration and vibration during the ascent, then reached Earth orbit before the translunar injection burn, sending the spacecraft toward the moon. This critical maneuver required precise timing, orientation, and engine performance. Any deviation could prevent the mission from reaching its intended lunar orbit. During the 3-day transit, the crew conducted routine checks on spacecraft systems, communications, and navigation. They monitored oxygen levels, fuel, electrical systems, and guidance computers. Apollo 11 operated on both automated and manual controls, with the astronauts prepared to intervene if necessary. Collins, in the command module, performed systems monitoring and trajectory adjustments, while Armstrong and Aldrin familiarized themselves with the lunar module in preparation for the historic descent. Every procedure was rehearsed countless times during simulations, but the reality of deep space added complexity and risk. The crew also conducted scientific observations during the journey. They photographed the Earth from a unique perspective, noting weather patterns, ocean currents, and cloud formations. The spacecraft trajectory passed through radiation belts, requiring careful shielding and monitoring to ensure crew safety. The astronauts maintained communication with mission control, reporting on spacecraft performance, crew health, and operational data. The daily discipline and focus were crucial for the mission's ultimate success. As Apollo 11 approached the Moon on July 19th, lunar orbit insertion required a precise engine burn to slow the spacecraft and allow it to be captured by the Moon's gravity. This maneuver was executed flawlessly, placing Apollo 11 into a stable lunar orbit. The astronauts conducted orbital surveys, photographed potential landing sites, and coordinated with mission control to select the safest location for descent. This step was critical, as the lunar module's landing would require maneuvering over uneven terrain, craters, and boulders. Every detail was scrutinized to ensure a smooth and safe landing. The crew's discipline, combined with the meticulous planning and engineering of NASA, kept the mission on track. Apollo 11 had successfully left Earth, navigated through space, and entered lunar orbit, a monumental achievement in human history. The stage was now set for the most daring and iconic part of the mission, the descent to the Moon's surface. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin prepared for descent in the lunar module, Eagle, while Michael Collins remained in orbit aboard the command module, Columbia. The descent was tense and required precise control. Armstrong manually piloted the module, carefully avoiding large craters, boulders, and uneven terrain that could jeopardize the landing. The lunar surface, though visible from orbit, revealed hazards that simulations could only partially replicate. Armstrong's calm focus, honed through years of training and experience, was essential to a successful touchdown. At 2017 Universal Time Coordinated, the Eagle touched down in the Sea of Tranquility, a flat plane chosen for its safety and scientific value. Armstrong radioed to Mission Control, Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. The world erupted in celebration. Millions of people across the globe listened to the transmission, witnessing a historic milestone for humanity. After securing systems and performing final checks, Armstrong became the first human to step onto the Moon, uttering the immortal words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Aldrin followed shortly after, describing the lunar surface as fine, powdery, and surprisingly solid beneath their boots. The astronauts conducted experiments, deployed scientific instruments, collected lunar rock samples, and took photographs to document their activities. They studied the surface composition, lunar soil, and geological formations, providing invaluable data for scientists on Earth. Their extravehicular activity lasted over 2 hours, demonstrating that humans could move, work, and survive in the Moon's low-gravity environment. Every task required careful planning, physical coordination, and attention to detail, as mistakes could have been catastrophic in the Moon's harsh environment. Meanwhile, Collins orbited above in Columbia, monitoring the command module systems, maintaining communication with Earth, and preparing for the ascent phase. The coordination between modules, astronauts, and mission control exemplified the peak of human engineering and teamwork. After completing surface operations, Armstrong and Aldrin ascended in the lunar module, successfully docking with Columbia. The three astronauts then began the return journey to Earth, carrying lunar samples and invaluable data. On July 24th, 1969, Apollo 11 safely splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. Recovery teams retrieved the crew and spacecraft, marking the completion of the first successful lunar mission. The achievement represented the culmination of years of technological innovation, rigorous training, and human courage. Apollo 11 proved that humans could leave Earth, land on another celestial body, and return safely. A defining moment of the 20th century and the apex of the space race. The successful landing of Apollo 11 in July 1969 resonated far beyond the United States, capturing the imagination of the entire world. People on every continent followed the historic events with intense fascination, watching television broadcasts, listening to radio reports, and reading newspaper coverage. In many countries, streets emptied as millions gathered in public spaces to witness humanity's first steps on the moon. The mission was more than a technological accomplishment. It was a symbolic victory, demonstrating what human determination, ingenuity, and cooperation could achieve. Leaders, scientists, educators, and ordinary citizens celebrated an achievement that transcended political and cultural boundaries. In the United States, the landing revitalized national pride during a tumultuous period marked by social unrest, the Vietnam War, and political upheaval. The moon landing became a unifying event, inspiring hope and fostering a sense of collective achievement. President Richard Nixon addressed the nation, highlighting the significance of Apollo 11 and the dedication of the astronauts, engineers, and mission control staff. Flags were raised across cities and towns. Public ceremonies honored those who contributed to the program, and countless Americans displayed the American flag as a symbol of their country's technological prowess. NASA, previously criticized for the risks and costs associated with space exploration, emerged as a hero institution, demonstrating the potential of science and innovation when directed toward a bold national objective. The global response was equally profound. Even nations aligned with the Soviet Union recognized the accomplishment, acknowledging the United States' success in landing humans on another celestial body. The mission sparked worldwide discussions about space exploration, scientific discovery, and the future of human civilization. Educational institutions reported increased interest in science, mathematics, and engineering as students aspired to contribute to humanity's ongoing exploration of space. Media outlets presented in-depth analyses of the mission, covering technical details, astronaut experiences, and the political context of the space race. Apollo 11 had transformed the public's perception of space, shifting it from a distant, theoretical concept to a tangible human achievement with profound cultural and scientific implications. The astronauts themselves became instant global icons. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were celebrated not only for their bravery and skill, but also for their humility, professionalism, and composure under extreme conditions. Public appearances, interviews, and international goodwill tours brought the astronauts into the spotlight, creating lasting symbols of human courage and ingenuity. For the American people, Apollo 11 represented the realization of President Kennedy's ambitious vision, demonstrating that a nation could set a bold goal, marshal its resources, and achieve the seemingly impossible. The moon landing became an enduring testament to human exploration and a defining moment of the 20th century. Beyond the political and cultural impact, Apollo 11 yielded critical scientific and technological advances. The astronauts conducted experiments on the lunar surface, including seismic measurements, laser reflectors, and soil analyses. They collected approximately 47 pounds, 21 kilograms, of lunar rock and regolith, which were transported back to Earth for detailed examination. These samples provided insights into the moon's geological history, revealing information about its composition, the process of lunar formation, and the effects of cosmic radiation. Scientists were able to compare lunar materials with Earth rocks, enhancing understanding of planetary evolution and the conditions present in the early solar system. The experiments conducted during Apollo 11 laid the groundwork for future lunar and planetary exploration. Seismometers installed on the moon recorded moonquakes, offering data about the internal structure and tectonic activity of Earth's nearest neighbor. The deployment of a laser reflector allowed precise measurements of the Earth-Moon distance, improving astronomical calculations and navigation accuracy. Solar wind experiments captured particles from the sun, contributing to knowledge about space weather, radiation, and magnetic fields. These findings were essential not only for scientific research, but also for planning future missions, including extended stays on the moon and exploration of other planetary bodies. Apollo 11's technological achievements were equally significant. The Saturn V rocket had proven itself as the most powerful launch vehicle in history, capable of lifting enormous payloads into orbit and beyond. The lunar module demonstrated precision landing capabilities in a low-gravity environment, and the command and service modules performed flawlessly during transit and re-entry. Advances in computing, navigation, communications, life support systems, and materials engineering were applied to other sectors, including aerospace, defense, and consumer technology. The program accelerated the development of microelectronics, software engineering, and precision instrumentation. Innovations in simulation and control systems improved not only space missions, but also industrial processes on Earth. Apollo 11 had therefore transformed science and technology globally, establishing a legacy that extended far beyond space exploration. Following Apollo 11, NASA faced the challenge of sustaining momentum while continuing to push the boundaries of space exploration. Subsequent Apollo missions, Apollo 12 through Apollo 17, built on the success of the first landing, exploring additional lunar regions, conducting more advanced experiments, and extending the duration of human presence on the moon. Each mission refined landing techniques, EVA procedures, and spacecraft operations, gradually transforming lunar exploration from a single historic event into a systematic scientific enterprise. Apollo 12's precise landing demonstrated NASA's increasing capability, while Apollo 15, 16, and 17 focused on geological studies and longer surface missions, utilizing the Lunar Rover for expanded mobility. These missions contributed enormously to scientific knowledge and reinforced the United States' leadership in space. The broader space race continued to shape global geopolitics and technological advancement. Although the United States had achieved the symbolic and strategic milestone of a moon landing, the Soviets continued their own ambitious programs, including space stations and long-duration orbital missions. The competition fostered rapid advancements in satellite technology, communications, materials science, and rocketry. Countries worldwide monitored developments closely, and space exploration became a powerful tool of diplomacy, propaganda, and national pride. The space race had transformed international relations, with each achievement signaling technological prowess and geopolitical influence. NASA's achievements inspired generations of scientists, engineers, and explorers. The moon landing proved that coordinated planning, disciplined execution, and human ingenuity could overcome immense challenges. Schools emphasized STEM education, industries invested in advanced technologies, and governments recognized the strategic importance of space. The legacy of Apollo 11 and subsequent missions also influenced culture, media, and public imagination. From literature and film to popular science and education, the narrative of space exploration became intertwined with human identity, ambition, and the desire to push beyond known limits. Apollo 11 had not only accomplished the impossible, but had also established a vision for humanity's ongoing exploration of space, an enduring testament to the audacity, determination, and skill that define the space race. After the historic success of Apollo 11, NASA sought to demonstrate that lunar exploration was not a one-time event, but could be executed with precision, repeatability, and scientific rigor. The next mission, Apollo 12, launched on November 14, 1969, with astronauts Charles Pete Conrad, Alan L. Bean, and Richard F. Gordon. Unlike Apollo 11, Apollo 12 was tasked with executing a precision landing near the previously deployed Surveyor 3 spacecraft, testing NASA's capability to land accurately on the moon and conduct scientific investigations. The mission emphasized technical skill, detailed planning, and enhanced scientific objectives, marking the transition from demonstration to systematic lunar exploration. The crew faced intense preparations. Training included simulations of lunar landings, navigation exercises, emergency contingencies, and detailed study of lunar surface features. Engineers refined the Saturn V launch sequence and ensured the lunar module systems were upgraded to handle precision maneuvers. Unlike Apollo 11, which landed in a relatively smooth area of the moon, Apollo 12 required exact navigation to touch down near the Surveyor spacecraft. This precision was crucial for future missions that would explore varied terrain and conduct extensive experiments. NASA combined guidance systems, manual piloting, and real-time calculations for mission control to ensure success. During the mission, Apollo 12 executed its launch and translunar injection flawlessly. The lunar module, Intrepid, separated from the command module and descended to the moon under Armstrong-style manual control, demonstrating the astronauts' skill and the reliability of the technology. The landing occurred just 200 meters from the Surveyor 3 spacecraft, a remarkable feat that highlighted NASA's growing expertise in precision operations. On the surface, Conrad and Bean conducted extensive sampling of lunar rocks, studied regolith composition, and retrieved components from the Surveyor probe to bring back to Earth. These experiments expanded knowledge of lunar geology and validated the feasibility of longer, more detailed missions. Apollo 12 also tested operational procedures for extended lunar stays. The astronauts spent over 31 hours on the surface, performing 2 extravehicular activities, EVAs, deploying scientific instruments, and photographing detailed lunar features. The mission confirmed that humans could perform complex tasks on the moon with both efficiency and safety, setting a precedent for future exploration. Meanwhile, Richard Gordon remained in lunar orbit aboard the command module, conducting observations, monitoring spacecraft systems, and maintaining communication with Earth. Apollo 12's success demonstrated that lunar exploration could transition from a symbolic achievement to an ongoing, practical, and scientifically valuable program. After Apollo 12, NASA's next planned lunar mission was Apollo 13, scheduled for April 1970, with astronauts James Lovell, Jack Swigert, and Fred Hayes. Apollo 13 aimed to land in the Fromaro region, but the mission became infamous for an in-flight disaster that tested the ingenuity, courage, and problem-solving skills of both the crew and mission control. Approximately 56 hours into the flight, an oxygen tank in the service module exploded, severely damaging the spacecraft. The explosion caused a loss of electrical power, reduction in oxygen supply, and compromised propulsion systems. Suddenly, the mission transformed from lunar exploration to a desperate struggle for survival. NASA and the astronauts quickly improvised solutions. Lovell and Hayes moved into the lunar module Aquarius, which was originally intended for the moon landing, using it as a lifeboat. Mission Control in Houston coordinated emergency procedures, developed innovative power conservation strategies, and calculated manual course corrections to bring the spacecraft safely back to Earth. The astronauts meticulously monitored oxygen, carbon dioxide levels, and temperature, while engineers on the ground devised improvised solutions, including the famous adaptation of square carbon dioxide scrubbers to fit round receptacles in the lunar module. Every decision required rapid calculation, creative problem solving, and clear communication under extreme stress. Despite the life-threatening challenges, Apollo 13 returned safely to Earth on April 17, 1970, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean. The mission became a symbol of teamwork, ingenuity, and resilience. The crisis highlighted the importance of redundancy, rigorous training, and contingency planning, while reaffirming public confidence in NASA. Apollo 13 did not achieve its lunar landing objective, yet it demonstrated the agency's capacity to manage emergencies in deep space and reinforce lessons that would inform future missions. The experience underscored that space exploration was inherently dangerous, requiring continuous vigilance, preparation, and collaboration between astronauts, engineers, and mission control staff. Apollo 13 also captured global attention, with millions following the tense developments through news broadcasts and live updates. The world marveled at the professionalism, calm demeanor, and problem-solving abilities displayed by the astronauts and mission team. In many ways, Apollo 13 became an iconic story of survival, reinforcing the idea that human courage and technical expertise could overcome even the most daunting obstacles in space. The mission's lessons would directly inform the planning, engineering, and operational procedures of subsequent Apollo missions, ensuring that safety remained paramount while humanity continued to push the boundaries of exploration. Following Apollo 13's near disaster, NASA launched Apollo 14 in January 1971 with astronauts Alan Shepard, Edgar Mitchell, and Stuart Roosa. Apollo 14's primary objectives were to land in the From Morrow region, previously planned for Apollo 13, and conduct extensive scientific exploration of the lunar surface. The mission focused on geological sampling, deployment of scientific instruments, and operational validation for longer lunar stays. Apollo 14 was also significant for demonstrating that NASA could overcome setbacks and maintain momentum in the space race despite earlier challenges. Shepard and Mitchell descended to the moon in the lunar module Antares, while Roosa orbited above in the command module. On the surface, the astronauts conducted multiple extravehicular activities, utilizing improved tools and procedures to collect rock and soil samples. They deployed the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments Package, ALSEP, which included instruments to measure seismic activity, solar wind, and heat flow. Shepard famously demonstrated that humans could perform physical tasks effectively in reduced gravity, famously hitting 2 golf balls using a makeshift club, demonstrating adaptability and dexterity under lunar conditions. These activities expanded both scientific knowledge and public fascination with lunar exploration. Apollo 14 also emphasized operational improvements. NASA integrated lessons learned from Apollo 12 and Apollo 13, refining landing procedures, EVA protocols, and safety measures. Communication systems were upgraded to ensure reliable contact with both Earth and orbiting modules. Engineers closely monitored environmental conditions, spacecraft performance, and astronaut health to minimize risks and optimize mission outcomes. The successful landing and extended surface operations reaffirmed NASA's ability to conduct complex lunar missions safely and effectively. The success of Apollo 14 furthered humanity's understanding of the moon and validated operational strategies for future missions. Rock samples revealed insights into lunar formation, volcanic activity, and crater impacts, providing a foundation for continued scientific research. Public interest in space exploration surged again, with media coverage celebrating both the astronauts' achievements and NASA's resilience. Apollo 14 demonstrated that lunar exploration was no longer an experiment or spectacle. It was an evolving scientific enterprise, combining rigorous engineering, skilled astronautics, and international inspiration. The space race continued to drive technological innovation, national pride, and global attention, while the United States solidified its leadership in human spaceflight. By 1971, NASA's lunar exploration missions had evolved from brief, symbolic visits into detailed scientific operations aimed at understanding the moon's geology, structure, and history. Apollo 15, launched on July 26, 1971, represented a major technological and operational leap in lunar exploration. Astronauts David Scott, James Irwin, and Alfred Worden were tasked not only with landing on the moon, but also with conducting extended surface operations and utilizing the newly developed Lunar Roving Vehicle, LRV, to dramatically expand mobility and the scope of scientific investigations. Apollo 15's planning involved extensive simulations of terrain navigation, rover operation, and EVA procedures. The LRV, nicknamed the Moon Buggy, was designed to operate in the moon's low-gravity environment, carrying tools, equipment, and samples across the surface. Astronauts underwent rigorous training to drive the rover, coordinate navigation with orbital imagery, and adapt to the moon's unpredictable terrain. Each step of the mission, from descent, landing, and rover deployment to extended exploration, required meticulous planning, precise calculations, and flawless coordination with mission control in Houston. The mission's landing site, the Hadley-Apennine region, was selected for its geological diversity. This area contained a variety of rock formations, craters, and slopes ideal for scientific investigation. Landing in this more challenging terrain required precise piloting, which David Scott executed with skill and composure. Once on the surface, Scott and Irwin quickly deployed the LRV and began traversing the lunar environment. The rover allowed them to travel far beyond the limited reach of previous missions, visiting locations previously inaccessible on foot. This increased range enabled detailed sampling, instrument deployment, and exploration of geological features, substantially enhancing the mission's scientific output. Apollo 15 also emphasized extended extravehicular activities, EVAs. Previous missions, like Apollo 11 and Apollo 12, had focused on brief surface operations lasting only a few hours. In contrast, Apollo 15's astronauts spent more than 18 hours outside the lunar module over 3 separate EVAs. These extended excursions enabled the collection of a larger number of rock samples, detailed photographic documentation, and deployment of the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments Package, ALSEP, which included seismic sensors, magnetometers, and heat flow probes. The combination of mobility via the rover and extended surface time allowed astronauts to conduct more comprehensive geological surveys than ever before, marking a turning point in lunar science. Apollo 15's scientific achievements represented a significant leap in understanding the moon. The astronauts collected more than 170 pounds, 77 kilograms, of lunar samples, including a variety of rocks that revealed the moon's volcanic history, crustal composition, and impact processes. Notably, they discovered the Genesis rock, an anorthosite sample that provided critical evidence about the moon's primordial crust and early differentiation. These findings deepened scientific knowledge of planetary formation and the evolutionary history of celestial bodies, offering insights applicable not only to the moon, but to Earth and other rocky planets in the solar system. The deployment of the lunar roving vehicle enabled the astronauts to explore diverse terrains, from craters to highlands, at distances exceeding 7 miles from the landing site. The rover carried instruments, rock collection tools, and cameras that facilitated extensive documentation. Observations of craters and boulder fields allowed geologists to interpret the moon's impact history, understanding the frequency and scale of meteorite collisions over billions of years. The scientific rigor applied on Apollo 15 elevated lunar exploration from mere surface visits to a methodical investigation of planetary geology, transforming the moon into a laboratory for studying fundamental processes of planetary formation. Apollo 15's experiments also contributed to understanding the moon's internal structure. Seismic instruments measured moonquakes and internal vibrations, revealing that the moon possessed a differentiated interior with a crust, mantle, and small core. Heat flow measurements quantified energy transfer within the lunar surface, and magnetometers helped map magnetic anomalies, providing clues about ancient magnetic fields. The combination of surface exploration, mobility, and scientific instrumentation enabled Apollo 15 to deliver unprecedented geological and geophysical data, setting new standards for subsequent lunar missions. These results reinforced NASA's ability to conduct rigorous science in extreme environments, demonstrating that humans could operate effectively on another celestial body. The mission also showcased human adaptability. Extended EVAs required careful management of fatigue, oxygen consumption, and mobility in low gravity. Astronauts navigated slopes, carried heavy sample containers, and operated complex instruments while maintaining precision and safety. Mission control monitored vital signs, system status, and navigational data, offering guidance and ensuring operational efficiency. Apollo 15 illustrated the synergy between human capability and technological innovation, proving that with proper training, planning, and equipment, humans could conduct complex scientific exploration far from Earth. Apollo 15's achievements had profound cultural, technological, and inspirational impact. Globally, the mission reinforced the United States' leadership in space exploration, demonstrating that human missions could move beyond symbolic milestones to detailed, rigorous scientific operations. Public interest in space exploration soared, with media coverage emphasizing both technological innovation and astronaut accomplishments. The Lunar Rover became a symbol of ingenuity, illustrating how human skill and advanced machinery could overcome environmental challenges. Schools, universities, and educational programs highlighted Apollo 15 as a model of scientific exploration and problem solving, inspiring new generations to pursue careers in science, engineering, and technology. Technologically, Apollo 15 advanced capabilities essential for long-duration extraterrestrial missions. Innovations in life support systems, navigation, communications, and surface mobility informed the design of later space vehicles, including orbiting space stations and planetary rovers. The mission also demonstrated the value of integrating automated instruments with human exploration, combining real-time decision-making with data collection for comprehensive scientific results. Lessons learned from rover design, EVA planning, and extended operations on the moon influenced subsequent missions to Mars, asteroids, and beyond. Apollo 15 exemplified how exploration missions could simultaneously achieve scientific, technological, and operational objectives. From a broader perspective, Apollo 15 strengthened NASA's vision of sustained human presence beyond Earth. The success of extended EVAs, mobile exploration, and sophisticated scientific experiments confirmed that astronauts could adapt to harsh environments while conducting meaningful research. The mission's achievements elevated human understanding of space operations, geology, and planetary science. Apollo 15 inspired international interest in collaborative space exploration and established operational standards that would guide NASA's subsequent lunar and interplanetary missions. The legacy of Apollo 15 extended far beyond its surface operations. It symbolized the potential of human ingenuity, resilience, and curiosity to expand the boundaries of what is possible. By 1972, NASA had refined lunar exploration to a highly precise science. Apollo 16, launched on April 16, 1972, represented the next step in the agency's ambitious plan to conduct detailed geological surveys of the moon. Astronauts John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Mattingly were selected for the mission, which targeted the Descartes Highlands, an area chosen for its complex terrain and scientific potential. Unlike previous missions that landed in Maria or relatively flat regions, Apollo 16 focused on highlands terrain, which promised insight into the moon's crustal evolution and volcanic history. Preparation for Apollo 16 involved extensive simulations and training. Astronauts practiced navigation over rugged terrain, deployed scientific instruments, and rehearsed emergency protocols for challenging landing sites. The mission introduced improved lunar surface mobility techniques, building on Apollo 15's success with the Lunar Roving Vehicle, LRV. Engineers refined the LRV for more challenging terrain, enabling astronauts to carry heavier equipment, traverse steep slopes, and transport large quantities of rock and soil samples. Mission planners also coordinated orbital and surface activities with enhanced precision, relying on improved guidance systems and real-time tracking for mission control in Houston. During descent, the lunar module Orion, piloted by John Young and Charles Duke, achieved a precise landing in the Descartes Highlands. The astronauts conducted 3 extended extravehicular activities, EVAs, using the LRV to explore craters, hills, and valleys. They collected over 200 pounds, 90 kilograms, of lunar material, including rock types previously unseen on the moon. Apollo 16's sampling strategy aimed to understand lunar volcanic activity, meteoroid impacts, and crustal composition. Thomas Mattingly remained in orbit aboard the command module Casper, performing reconnaissance, monitoring the lunar module, and relaying scientific observations to Earth. The coordination between the orbital and surface crews exemplified NASA's mastery of complex mission logistics. Apollo 16 also emphasized scientific experiments. Astronauts deployed instruments from the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments Package, ALSEP, which measured seismic activity, heat flow, and magnetic fields. These data allowed scientists to build models of the moon's internal structure and thermal history. Detailed photographs documented lunar morphology, boulder distribution, and regolith characteristics, providing critical reference for both research and future missions. By combining extended EVAs, rover mobility, and sophisticated instrumentation, Apollo 16 elevated lunar exploration to a level of rigor and detail unmatched by prior missions. The mission's success reinforced confidence in NASA's ability to conduct long-term, scientifically valuable operations on extraterrestrial surfaces. Apollo 17, launched on December 7, 1972, marked the final chapter in NASA's Apollo lunar program. The crew, Eugene Cernan, Harrison Schmitt, and Ronald Evans, carried the dual objectives of advancing scientific understanding and demonstrating operational excellence in lunar exploration. Notably, Harrison Schmitt was the first professional geologist to walk on the moon, bringing an unprecedented level of expertise to sample collection, field analysis, and interpretation of lunar features. This focus on geology reflected NASA's commitment to extracting maximum scientific value from its remaining missions. Apollo 17 targeted the Taurus-Latrobe Valley, selected for its diverse geological formations, including both highland and mare features. The landing required precise piloting due to the valley's rugged terrain and deep craters. Cernan and Schmitt conducted 3 extensive EVAs, totaling over 22 hours on the lunar surface. They deployed ALSEP instruments, examined surface structures, and collected more than 240 pounds, 110 kilograms, of lunar samples, including orange soil, a volcanic glass deposit that provided insight into the moon's volcanic and impact history. These samples became invaluable for understanding lunar chronology, geochemical composition, and planetary evolution. The mission also emphasized technological proficiency. The lunar roving vehicle was utilized extensively, allowing astronauts to traverse several kilometers, conduct multiple sampling stops, and explore regions previously inaccessible. EVAs required meticulous planning to manage oxygen, power, and suit life support systems. Onboard cameras, portable tools, and sample containers were integrated into the rover for efficient fieldwork. Meanwhile, Evans monitored the command module, conducting scientific observations, capturing high-resolution photography, and performing critical orbital experiments. The teamwork between orbital and surface crews was exemplary, demonstrating NASA's operational maturity in complex mission execution. Apollo 17 provided unique scientific contributions. The discovery of orange soil confirmed evidence of volcanic pyroclastic activity, altering previous assumptions about lunar geology. Detailed mapping of craters, rock types, and surface stratigraphy improved models of lunar formation. ALSEP data provided new insights into seismic activity, thermal conductivity, and magnetic properties. The mission's emphasis on professional geology and extended EVAs transformed lunar exploration into a sophisticated scientific enterprise. Apollo 17's combination of operational precision, scientific discovery, and human adaptability represented the culmination of a decade-long program that had expanded humanity's understanding of Earth's nearest neighbor. The Apollo 15, 16, and 17 missions collectively transformed human understanding of the moon from a symbolic destination to a laboratory of planetary science. They demonstrated that humans could live, work, and conduct meaningful scientific research in extraterrestrial environments for extended periods. The inclusion of professional geologists, enhanced mobility via the Lunar Rover, and expanded EVAs ensured that the missions delivered unprecedented quantities of geological, geophysical, and environmental data. Scientists gained insights into lunar formation, volcanic history, meteorite impacts, and crustal structure, solidifying the moon's role as a key reference point for understanding terrestrial planets. Culturally, the later Apollo missions reinforced the United States leadership in space and inspired a generation of scientists, engineers, and explorers. The missions illustrated that space exploration required not just bravery, but careful planning, technological innovation, and international vision. Apollo 17, as humanity's last moon landing, carried symbolic weight. Cernan famously described his departure as leaving footprints for future explorers, emphasizing humanity's ongoing quest to explore and understand the cosmos. The iconic photographs, videos, and personal accounts from these missions entered the global imagination, inspiring literature, film, education, and a sense of shared human achievement. Technologically, the Apollo program's later missions pushed the limits of engineering, computing, navigation, life support systems, and spacecraft design. The integration of human and robotic operations, precision piloting, and real-time decision-making under extreme conditions established operational standard for future space programs, including space stations, planetary probes, and eventual plans for Mars missions. The program also demonstrated the strategic value of space exploration during the Cold War, combining scientific discovery with political, cultural, and technological leadership. The lessons of Apollo's final missions emphasized resilience, innovation, and international inspiration, leaving a legacy that shaped decades of space research, education, and exploration initiatives. Humanity's footprint on the moon became a permanent testament to courage, ingenuity, and the enduring pursuit of knowledge. By 1973, the Apollo program had reached its operational and symbolic peak. With Apollo 17 marking the final moon landing, NASA began transitioning its focus toward orbital programs, space stations, and long-duration missions. The earlier Apollo missions had not only captured public imagination, but also provided critical insights into space operations, planetary science, and human physiology in extreme environments. The program's conclusion reflected both practical considerations, such as budget constraints and political priorities, and the desire to extend human presence in space beyond lunar exploration. The end of the Apollo era offered NASA an opportunity to reflect on the program's achievements. Technologically, Apollo had pushed the boundaries of rocket design, navigation systems, life support technologies, and communications networks. The development and successful deployment of the Saturn V rocket represented a pinnacle of human engineering, capable of lifting over 140 metric tons into low Earth orbit and sending astronauts to the moon with precise trajectory control. The Apollo spacecraft, including the command module, service module, and lunar module, demonstrated reliability, redundancy, and adaptability, enabling humans to survive and operate safely in the vacuum of space. Scientifically, the program had revolutionized planetary research. The return of thousands of lunar rock and soil samples provided detailed knowledge of the moon's composition, geological history, and formation processes. Instruments deployed on the lunar surface captured seismic, thermal, and magnetic data that informed models of lunar and planetary interiors. Experiments conducted by astronauts expanded understanding of human physiology and microgravity, radiation exposure, and long-duration spaceflight challenges. Apollo also fostered innovation in materials science, computer engineering, and robotics, yielding technologies with applications far beyond space exploration, including medicine, industrial automation, and telecommunications. Culturally, Apollo shaped global perceptions of space, human capability, and technological achievement. The moon landings demonstrated that ambitious goals could be achieved through planning, discipline, and collaboration. The program inspired a generation of engineers, scientists, and explorers while reinforcing a sense of shared human accomplishment. Public enthusiasm, educational engagement, and media coverage highlighted the extraordinary nature of Apollo missions, leaving a lasting impression on collective consciousness. The end of the program marked not failure, but the completion of a bold chapter, preparing humanity for new horizons in orbital and interplanetary exploration. Following the Apollo moon landings, NASA began shifting attention to orbital space stations and long-duration missions to maintain technological momentum and address practical human spaceflight challenges. The development of Skylab, America's first space station was directly influenced by Apollo technology. Engineers repurposed Saturn V rockets to launch the orbital laboratory, integrating systems derived from command and service modules to support extended crew habitation, scientific experiments, and in-orbit maintenance. Skylab provided an opportunity to study the effects of microgravity on human physiology over periods of several weeks to months, a critical step towards sustainable space exploration. Skylab missions, 1973 to 1974, tested life support systems, onboard laboratories, and exercise protocols necessary to mitigate the effects of weightlessness, including muscle atrophy, bone density loss, and cardiovascular changes. Crews conducted experiments in materials science, astronomy, and Earth observation, leveraging orbital platforms to perform research impractical on the ground. Long-duration missions demonstrated the feasibility of continuous human presence in space, laying the groundwork for future space stations such as Mir and the International Space Station, ISS. The integration of Apollo-derived spacecraft with new orbital habitats showcased NASA's ability to adapt technologies for evolving mission objectives. The transition also reflected political and budgetary realities. Funding for lunar missions had declined, necessitating a strategic pivot to projects that balance scientific, technological, and public engagement goals. Skylab provided visible accomplishments while continuing the exploration of space in a sustainable and cost-effective manner. Lessons learned from Apollo, such as mission planning, crew coordination, and emergency preparedness, were directly applied to Skylab operations. In addition, Skylab missions allowed NASA to continue leadership in human spaceflight, demonstrating technological competence and innovation even as the intense competition of the space race began to shift toward collaboration and international space programs. The conclusion of the Apollo program and transition to orbital stations marked a turning point in the global space race. By the mid-1970s, the geopolitical context of the Cold War influenced space exploration priorities. While the United States had demonstrated supremacy with lunar landings, the Soviet Union focused on long-duration orbital missions, space stations, and robotic exploration. Programs like Salyut and Soyuz reflected a shift from high-risk lunar endeavors to sustained presence in low Earth orbit. Both nations recognized that human spaceflight was not only a technological showcase, but also a tool for diplomacy, strategic advantage, and scientific research. The United States' continued investment in orbital platforms, exemplified by Skylab, highlighted an understanding that the future of space exploration required infrastructure, operational experience, and human adaptability. Crews conducted complex tasks, including scientific experiments, in-orbit repairs, and logistical operations, providing critical knowledge about life support systems, energy management, and spacecraft maintenance. The lessons learned from Apollo missions, such as mission planning, emergency protocols, and human factors engineering, were instrumental in ensuring the success of these extended orbital missions. NASA also began to plan future collaborative missions, anticipating international partnerships that would characterize space exploration in the coming decades. Culturally, the end of the Apollo program did not diminish public fascination with space. Rather, it evolved. While moon landings capture headlines, orbital missions emphasize sustained human achievement, experimentation, and technological adaptation. Educational programs, media coverage, and public outreach continued to inspire generations to pursue STEM careers. Internationally, Apollo's legacy influenced programs in Europe, Japan, and other countries, fostering interest in collaborative research and orbital operations. The space race had transitioned from a narrow competition to a broader global endeavor, setting the stage for cooperation in space science, human exploration, and shared technological advancement. Apollo's conclusion marked the end of lunar competition, but the beginning of a new era of orbital exploration, collaboration, and the enduring quest to expand human presence beyond Earth. The space race, spanning from the late 1950s to the early 1970s, left a profound legacy on technological development, scientific research, and human ambition. Even after the Apollo program concluded, the innovations created for lunar exploration continued to influence countless aspects of modern life. Rocket technology, computer systems, material science, and aerospace engineering all advanced rapidly as a direct consequence of the intense competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. The need for precision, reliability, and safety in spaceflight drove innovation at unprecedented speeds, often compressing decades of technological development into a few years. One of the most significant areas of advancement was in computing and electronics. The Apollo spacecraft required compact, reliable, and high-performance computers to manage navigation, guidance, and life support systems. The Apollo Guidance Computer, AGC, was among the first to use integrated circuits at a scale previously unseen, setting a precedent for miniaturization and reliability in computing. This innovation directly influenced the development of microprocessors and personal computers in the 1970s and 1980s. The programming methods developed for spaceflight, prioritizing redundancy, error correction, and efficient code, became foundational for modern software engineering, particularly in systems where failure was not an option, including medical devices, aviation, and defense. Rocketry and propulsion technologies also advanced significantly. The Saturn V, the most powerful rocket ever built, demonstrated principles of multi-stage design, thrust optimization, and fuel efficiency that informed both military and civilian applications. The Soviets, through their N-1 program and subsequent developments in orbital rockets, also contributed to a competitive atmosphere that accelerated innovation globally. Materials science benefited as well, with the development of heat-resistant alloys, lightweight composites, and durable polymers initially designed for spacecraft hulls, spacesuits, and thermal shielding. These technologies found rapid application in aviation, industrial manufacturing, electronics, and even consumer goods, including sports equipment and household appliances. Communications and telemetry systems reached new heights during the space race. Continuous tracking of spacecraft across thousands of miles of space required global networks of ground stations, satellites, and sophisticated signal processing equipment. Innovations in real-time telemetry, long-distance radio communications, and satellite technology laid the foundation for modern GPS, telecommunications, weather monitoring, and remote sensing systems. Space exploration also fostered advancements in imaging technology, from high-resolution cameras for lunar photography to early satellite imaging for Earth observation. These achievements exemplified how the demands of the space race catalyzed technologies that transformed civilian, commercial, and military sectors, demonstrating that investment in space exploration yielded benefits far beyond the initial scientific objectives. The scientific achievements of the space race were not limited to lunar samples and orbital mechanics. They extended profoundly into Earth sciences and global understanding. Satellites launched during this era provided continuous observation of weather patterns, climate phenomena, and environmental changes. The first weather satellites, such as TIROS in the early 1960s, allowed for real-time monitoring of storms, hurricanes, and seasonal variations, transforming meteorology and disaster preparedness. Earth observation satellites, derived from reconnaissance technologies developed during the space race, provided unprecedented data on agriculture, land use, water resources, and natural resource management. In addition, space-based research advanced astronomy and planetary science. Instruments deployed on satellites, probes, and manned missions collected data on solar activity, cosmic radiation, and planetary atmospheres, contributing to the broader understanding of the solar system. Lunar samples from Apollo missions continued to provide insights into planetary formation and the history of the solar system. Analysis of these samples revealed the moon's volcanic activity, crater formation processes, and the composition of its crust and mantle, offering parallels to Earth's early history. The combination of direct exploration, sample return, and remote observation established a comprehensive scientific foundation for the study of planets, moons, and interplanetary space. Human physiology research also benefited significantly. Long-duration exposure to microgravity during orbital missions, particularly with Skylab and later Soviet space station missions, provided crucial data on muscle atrophy, bone density loss, cardiovascular changes, and radiation exposure. These findings were essential for planning extended missions to Mars, asteroids, and deep space habitats. Medical technologies developed for monitoring astronauts' health, including telemetry-based heart monitoring, exercise equipment, and life support systems, influenced healthcare practices on Earth. Rehabilitation protocols, nutrition, and exercise regimens derived from spaceflight research enhanced treatment strategies for veteran patients and those with degenerative diseases. The space race's scientific impact thus extended from the moon and orbital environments to Earth, establishing a legacy of knowledge that informed multiple disciplines and continues to guide exploration and innovation today. Beyond science and technology, the space race profoundly shaped culture, education, and public imagination. The achievements of the United States and the Soviet Union inspired generations of students to pursue careers in STEM fields. Schools and universities emphasize mathematics, physics, and engineering education, often incorporating space exploration into curricula to motivate students and demonstrate practical applications of scientific principles. Public outreach programs, science museums, and planetariums expanded, offering interactive demonstrations of rocketry, astronomy, and space technology. The excitement of human spaceflight, from Mercury to Apollo, created a cultural zeitgeist in which space exploration symbolized innovation, ambition, and the potential for human achievement. The media played a central role in amplifying the cultural impact. Televised broadcasts of launches, moonwalks, and space station operations brought space directly into homes worldwide, fostering shared experiences and a sense of global participation. Iconic moments: Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon, Apollo 13's crisis resolution, or Skylab's orbital research, became embedded in collective memory, inspiring literature, films, and art. The imagery and narratives of exploration reinforced themes of curiosity, courage, and problem-solving, shaping not only public perception of science, but also broader societal aspirations for progress and collaboration. Internationally, the space race influenced geopolitics and collaboration in ways that persisted long after the Apollo era. The demonstration of technological capability became a form of soft power, influencing diplomatic negotiations and alliances. Space achievements fostered scientific collaboration and exchange, particularly in areas such as satellite technology, Earth observation, and joint experiments aboard orbital platforms. The space race also served as a cautionary tale about the costs and pressures of competition, highlighting the need for strategic planning and long-term vision in national space programs. Ultimately, the space race left a lasting imprint on society. It inspired wonder, elevated education, accelerated technological advancement, and reshaped humanity's conception of its place in the cosmos. The space race, while rooted in Cold War rivalry, ultimately laid the groundwork for a new era of international collaboration in space. By the 1980s, the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union evolved into a recognition that space exploration could be more productive when approached collaboratively rather than competitively. The technological, scientific, and operational advancements of the Apollo era directly influenced emerging programs like NASA's Space Shuttle, the Soviet Buran program, and orbital station projects such as Mir. Both nations understood that sustaining a human presence in space required shared expertise, extensive infrastructure, and long-term investment in human health, life support systems, and mission planning. The Space Shuttle program, which began with the launch of Columbia in 1981, was a direct descendant of Apollo's engineering and operational lessons. The shuttle was designed for reuse, enabling multiple flights to low Earth orbit, deployment of satellites, and assembly of orbital platforms. The shuttle systems relied on Apollo-era technologies. Advanced navigation computers, life support systems, and guidance mechanisms were refined versions of those used in lunar missions. Operational experience gained from Skylab and Apollo informed protocols for EVA procedures, on-orbit repairs, and crew training. This continuity demonstrated how the space race's legacy endured, influencing the methods, safety standards, and scientific ambitions of subsequent human spaceflight initiatives. International collaboration accelerated in the late 1980s and 1990s. The Soviet Union's Mir space station hosted American astronauts, creating the first sustained joint operations in orbit. These exchanges demonstrated the practical value of combining expertise from different nations and cultural approaches to space science. Lessons learned from joint missions, coordination across languages, technology standards, and mission philosophies set a precedent for the construction and operation of the International Space Station, ISS. Apollo's influence persisted. Precision engineering, mission planning, emergency preparedness, and crew resource management remained central pillars. The intense Cold War rivalry that had driven lunar exploration evolved into a cooperative ethos, enabling humanity to achieve long-duration habitation, sophisticated scientific experimentation, and global scientific integration in orbit. The cultural impact of this transition was profound. The space race inspired awe, optimism, and a sense of shared achievement, but international cooperation underscored humanity's potential for peaceful collaboration in space. Projects like Mir and the ISS demonstrated that former rivals could unite around scientific and technological goals for mutual benefit. Global engagement increased as more countries joined the conversation, providing expertise, funding, and scientific contributions. Apollo's legacy, ambition, risk-taking, and human ingenuity had transcended geopolitical competition to create a framework for multinational space exploration, establishing the foundation for the modern era of collaborative research, planetary science, and human settlement beyond Earth. The technological and scientific momentum generated by the space race continued to shape human progress well into the 21st century. Apollo missions introduced innovations that influenced satellite communications, GPS navigation, weather forecasting, materials engineering, and robotics. Microelectronics, miniaturized computing, and real-time telemetry, all critical for lunar missions, became essential to modern industry, healthcare, and global communication systems. Space exploration accelerated innovations in environmental monitoring, disaster management, and agricultural science, demonstrating that investments in extreme technological challenges often produce broad societal benefits. Human physiology research also advanced considerably. Apollo and Skylab provided the first detailed observations of the effects of microgravity on the human body, and these findings informed the design of long-duration missions to Mir, the ISS, and beyond. Exercise protocols, nutritional planning, and medical monitoring systems were developed to ensure crew health during months-long missions. Space medicine now applies these lessons to understand osteoporosis, muscle wasting, cardiovascular changes, and radiation exposure, creating insights that benefit patients on Earth. Moreover, the psychological and behavioral studies conducted during prolonged missions enhanced understanding of stress management, teamwork, and human performance in isolated, confined environments, knowledge crucial for future Mars missions or deep space expeditions. Exploration of celestial bodies beyond the Moon owes its foundation to Apollo-era achievements. NASA, the European Space Agency, ESA, Roscosmos, and other international programs have launched robotic missions to Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and asteroids, applying techniques first tested in Apollo. Sample return missions, rover mobility systems, orbital science platforms, and autonomous navigation technologies trace their origins to concepts validated during the Moon missions. Apollo's methodology, combining rigorous engineering, careful mission planning, and incremental risk-taking, remains the template for both human and robotic exploration, illustrating the enduring scientific value of the space race. Humanity's quest to understand planetary formation, solar system dynamics, and potential habitability of other worlds is a direct extension of the foundation laid during those intense years of competition. The cultural and inspirational legacy of the space race continues to resonate. Apollo missions demonstrated that audacious goals, when pursued with discipline, collaboration, and creativity, could yield extraordinary achievements. Neil Armstrong's first steps on the Moon, the safe return of Apollo 13, and the scientific accomplishments of Apollo 15 to 17 remain iconic symbols of human courage and ingenuity. These narratives continue to motivate students, scientists, and explorers worldwide, fostering a culture of innovation and ambition. Museums, films, books, and educational programs preserve the stories of astronauts, engineers, and scientists, ensuring that the space race's impact extends far beyond technological achievements. Looking forward, Apollo's legacy informs humanity's vision for future exploration. NASA's Artemis program aims to return humans to the Moon, establishing sustainable lunar bases that will serve as springboards for Mars and beyond. Private companies, including SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others, leverage advancements pioneered during Apollo to develop reusable rockets, orbital habitats, and commercial spaceflight. International partnerships expand opportunities for scientific collaboration, resource utilization, and interplanetary research. The principles demonstrated by Apollo, risk management, meticulous planning, human adaptability, and technological integration, remain central to these ambitious goals, ensuring continuity between past achievements and future exploration. The broader societal influence of the space race endures as well. Apollo missions expanded humanity's conception of possibility, inspiring generations to pursue STEM education and careers. The program emphasized international cooperation, the pursuit of knowledge, and the integration of science, engineering, and human ingenuity. Humanity's presence beyond Earth, initially motivated by rivalry and ambition, has evolved into a collective endeavor aimed at expanding scientific understanding, technological capability, and the human experience itself. In this sense, the space race was not merely a historical competition, but the beginning of a long-term journey. Its lessons, achievements, and inspiration continue to guide humanity toward a future in which exploration, discovery, and innovation remain central to our identity as a species, ensuring that the drive to reach beyond our planet endures for generations to come. And that concludes our deep dive into the space race, a story of ambition, rivalry, and humanity's first steps beyond our home planet. Today on History Teller YT, we've explored everything from Sputnik's launch to the moon landings of Apollo 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, and 17, and beyond, into orbital stations like Skylab. We've seen the triumphs, the disasters, and the incredible courage of astronauts, scientists, and engineers who turned imagination into reality. So what's the moral of the story? The space race teaches us that human curiosity and determination are limitless. Challenges, whether technological, political, or life-threatening, can be overcome with ingenuity, teamwork, and persistence. It reminds us that exploration, whether of the moon, Mars, or the far reaches of the universe, is not just about technology or rivalry, but about pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, inspiring generations, and uniting people through shared achievement. From the lessons of Apollo 13's crisis management to the precision of Apollo 12's lunar landing, from the Lunar Rover's extended exploration to the collaborative spirit that led to the International Space Station, this story shows that progress is possible when humans dare to dream big and work together. If you enjoyed this journey through space history, remember to subscribe to History Teller YT, because there's always more history to uncover. Stories that inspire, teach, and remind us of humanity's extraordinary potential. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an adventure through time. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you leave inspired by the audacity of those who dare to explore the unknown. The universe is vast, our curiosity is boundless, and the next chapter in human exploration is waiting. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep imagining.